10 years ago, my son went missing after a cargo ship exploded in the Atlantic. They never found his body, and eventually everyone accepted that he was gone. But at 4:07 a.m., my phone rang unexpectedly. A trembling voice whispered, "Dad, I'm at Birthgate 4. Please come get me." 30 minutes later, a man stepped out of the darkness with a face identical to my son's. Those same eyes, that same scar, that same voice. I pulled him into a tight hug, my heart nearly breaking. But in that very moment, I realized something was terribly, terribly wrong. This is a story about family betrayal and rebuilding trust. Quick note, some details have been fictionalized for storytelling. The lesson at the heart of this story is what matters most. The phone call at 4:07 in the morning came from a dead man. I knew the precise hour because sleep had abandoned me since 3:30, same as most nights across the last 10 years, watching the Savannah River through the bedroom glass of a 12-room mansion that echoed with absence. 68 years old, and I'd taken Vasey Maritime Holdings from one vessel to a $200 million operation. Still, each dawn broke over the same emptiness Calder left behind when his ship went down in the Atlantic a decade back. The screen on my phone read, "Birthgate 4, Savannah Port Authority." I answered on the second ring. "A father," the voice said, shaking wrung out unmistakably young. "Father, I'm at Birthgate 4. Please help me." My grip closed hard around the phone. The rhythm of it was familiar, that faint rasp threading the tail of each sentence, the rush of syllables like words running from quiet. But in 28 years, Calder had never once put the word father in his mouth. It was always dad. The old man when he wanted a laugh. Never father. A decade of silence, and now this voice arrived through the Georgia coastal dark. "Stay where you are," I told him. "I'm on my way." 4 minutes, and I was behind the wheel of my Cadillac, moving through deserted Savannah streets, toward the working port where freighters sat in rows like enormous animals at rest beneath orange sodium light. Salt air and diesel drifted in through the window I'd left cracked. Both hands rode the wheel without so much as a tremor. That steadiness told me everything. I was not the grief-hollowed old fool someone had decided I'd become. 4 decades in maritime shipping sharpens you in particular ways. You learn which handshakes close a deal and which ones open a courtroom. You learn which smiles hold warmth and which ones are just the face a man makes before he slips the knife in. So when a supposed miracle materializes at 4:07 in the morning, the raid is automatic, a con is being run. The only real question was never whether that voice was Calder's. It was who stood to gain by putting Calder's face on a stranger and what exactly they were positioning to strip away once I'd fallen apart. I swung onto Harbor Road. The Savannah Port Authority gate filled the windshield, chain-link floodlamps, hard-edged shadows laid across broken pavement. A lone figure waited in that amber wash, narrow shoulders folded inward, wrapped in a salt-beaten sailor's coat that bore the look of serious ocean miles. I brought the car to the curb and shut off the engine. "Welcome. I'm glad you found your way here today. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me who in this story are you already pulling for. Is it the father trying to hold everything together or someone else entirely? I'd genuinely love to know." A quick note before we begin: some details in this story have been shaped for audio storytelling, and any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the heart of it. The man turned toward me. Green eyes, square jaw. The slight hook across his nose where Calder broke it in a high school baseball game. Even the stance weight settled on the left foot, right hand, wrapped around the opposite elbow, matched the posture I'd studied across a decade of photographs. I stepped out of the car. The river wine tugged at my shirt. He covered the distance in 3 steps, his face fully exposed under the floodlights. If someone had built a copy, they'd built a masterwork. Cheekbones exact, hairline precise. Even the small scar above his left eyebrow, 4 stitches, age 9. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice cracking at the seam. "It's really me. I'm home." I opened my arms. He came into them. And I knew. Calder had carried a ritual since he was 7 years old that never varied once. Every embrace, airport, goodbyes, kitchen mornings, standing beside his mother's grave ended the same way. 3 quick pats on my back. 1, 2, 3. 21 years of it without exception. Right through the morning, he walked up the gangway of the vessel that carried him into the Atlantic. This man held me without moving arms, locked around me, breath ragged against my shoulder body, shaking with what I was meant to take as relief exhaustion, the crushing weight of 10 lost years. No 3 pats. Not 2, not 4. Not the unconscious signature that had belonged to Calder since childhood. Just stillness where the truth should have been. I held on for 5 seconds past what was natural. Let him read it as emotion. Let him think the grief-wrecked father was too undone by hope to reason straight. I stepped back, took his shoulders in both hands, looked into those flawless green eyes someone had paid a surgeon to manufacture. "Let me take you home, son," I said, threading exactly the right waver into my voice. "You must be exhausted. I can't believe I'm finally back." He dragged a hand across his eyes, real tears or a skilled performance, hard to say. I thought about this moment every single day. "So did I said. Truth and lie braided together. I walked him to the Cadillac. He folded into the passenger seat, Calder's seat, vacant for a decade, and I turned the engine over. The dashboard read 4:43. 36 minutes since the phone call. 36 minutes since someone made their move. Because here is what they hadn't accounted for. I'd spent 10 years constructing walls around the wound Calder left behind. I'd spent 10 years learning how to operate with half of myself missing. I'd become a man who could sit opposite an imposter wearing his son's face and feel nothing except cold, deliberate clarity. Whoever dispatched this man believed they were leveraging my grief. What they had actually done was put a loose thread in my hands, and I had spent 4 decades learning to pull threads until entire structures came apart. I drove through the pre-dawn dark while he assembled his story amnesia fishing boats, a slow return of scattered memories. The performance was without obvious flaw. Someone had done serious work, Calder's vocal patterns, his mannerisms probably a catalog of family details fed to him for deployment at calculated moments. But they'd missed the 3 pats. That small private ritual that existed in no photograph, no document, no file anyone could have pulled. The kind of thing only a father and his real son would ever carry. And now I had 3 certainties. First, this was not Calder. Second, whoever architected this deception held deep knowledge of my family. Third, they had made the terminal error of confusing a grieving father with an incapacitated one. I turned into the mansion drive as the eastern horizon began to pale. Back at Birth Gate 4, beneath those sodium lamps, Dax Marrow 37, hollow-cheeked under that weathered coat, had stood trembling behind a surgically reconstructed face that was nearly a perfect replica of my missing son. The imposter took in the house with the eyes of a man returning home. I took him in, calculating precisely how long I'd let the performance run before I dismantled everyone behind it. "Welcome back, son," I said, and I meant every word of it because he had just walked into the trap he believed he was setting. I showed him up to Calder's old room at 5 o'clock in the morning, then came back downstairs and cooked a dead man's favorite breakfast for the stranger borrowing his face. The scent of andouille and eggs rising from the skillet felt like a betrayal of memory. Dawn light came low through the kitchen windows that faced the Savannah River. I'd picked up the andouille at Habersham Market, same smoky blend Calder could detect from his bedroom, which would bring him downstairs in under 30 seconds. Sunday tradition, 18 years running. Scrambled eggs with andouille Georgia pecan toast, and exactly 3 shakes of Cholula on the side. 6 eggs into the cast iron. The sizzle rose, and with it, the dense paprika-dark smell of pork fat in a hot pan. My hands ran through motions they knew by heart, while my mind worked back through everything from the drive. The way Dax held his hands. The half-beat pause before answering. The too clean surfacing of childhood memories. On the security monitor clipped to my phone, the imposter lay upstairs on his back mouth, barely parted chest, moving in smooth, even rhythm. But Calder had carried asthma since age 12. Sleep always brought a faint whistle to his exhale. This man breathed without effort, without restriction. Another crack. Another tell. "I'm not cooking breakfast," I said to the empty kitchen. "I'm laying traps." Footsteps on the stairs at 7 o'clock on the dot. I plated the eggs arranged, the toast poured coffee into Calder's chipped University of Georgia Bulldogs mug. Dax came into the kitchen in Calder's old Georgia Bulldog sweatshirt, hair still damp. He crossed to the breakfast table and settled into the chair Calder had claimed, since he was small left side facing the water without a moment's pause. Every gesture landed. The two-handed grip around the mug, the grateful smile pulling at the corners of his eyes, the small breath of pleasure as the andouille hit him. Precise. Rehearsed. Like an actor who had the blocking down cold, but had never found the character underneath. "Smells incredible, Dad," he said. "Exactly how I remembered it every single day for 10 years. "Your favorite," I said, settling across from him. "I haven't made it since—" I let it hang, watched him move to fill the space. "Since I left," he said, voice dropping. "I know. I'm sorry for everything I put you through." I nodded and chewed slowly. He took his first bite and closed his eyes in apparent pleasure, then reached for the salt shaker. Not the hot sauce. Calder applied exactly 3 shakes of Cholula before his fork ever touched the eggs. 18 years of Sunday mornings had made it reflex. This man seasoned like anyone else, and ate without it. I said nothing. Filed it alongside the absent backpats and the unlabored breathing and the word father where Dad belonged. 40 years of reading corporate deceivers taught me one consistent rule: the more polished the performance, the more rehearsal hours it took, and the more there was beneath it worth hiding. "The river looks exactly the way I remembered," Dax said, eyes on the windows. "I used to sit here every morning and watch the ships come in. Accurate." Calder had done precisely that. Someone had filled this man with curated memories, rehearsed him through family ritual, readied him for interrogation. But they'd missed the hot sauce. They'd missed the breathing. And they had absolutely missed what happened next. The click of nails on hardwood announced Compass before he appeared. My 11-year-old golden retriever ambled into the kitchen with his usual morning energy, graying muzzle tilted up toward the andouille. His tail moved in wide, lazy sweeps as he came to me first, and I reached down to work my fingers behind his ears. "Hey there, old boy," Dax said, voice easy and warm. "Remember me? It's been so long." Compass's tail stopped mid-arc. The dog had been angling toward Dax, pulled by the voice and the offered hand, but he halted 3 feet out. His hackles rose in a thin ridge along his spine. His ears folded back. I watched it happen as it happened, the biological recognition system that no surgeon's skill could deceive. "He slowed down," I said, keeping my voice level. "Age catches up." Dax dropped a strip of bacon onto the floor. Calder's old move, the one that had always sent Compass into joyful disorder. The dog looked at the bacon. He looked at Dax. Then he retreated 2 steps rather than diving forward. Compass. Dax tried patting his knee. Come here, boy. The retriever turned away and walked out of the kitchen. I heard him find his bed near the fireplace, tags chiming softly as he circled 3 times and lay down. Dogs cannot lie. They cannot be rehearsed, charmed, or brought around by a flawless performance. Compass had loved Calder above everyone, above me, above anyone who had ever come through that door. If the man at my table were truly my son, that dog would have been undone by joy, not retreating to another room. Watching Compass reject the man wearing Calder's face, I grasped the full architecture of what had been constructed, a weapon built to hollow me out from within. I should go clean up properly, Dax said, pushing back from the table. This still doesn't feel real. Take all the time you need, I told him. You're home now. He smiled and went upstairs. I waited until I heard the bathroom door pull shut, the pipes humming as water moved through them. Then I reached for my encrypted phone, the one reserved for corporate emergencies, hostile takeover defenses, union negotiations that couldn't leave a trace. I found Bram Atchley's contact and pressed call. 30 years of friendship, 22 years with the FBI before he retired and built his own private investigation firm. If anyone could help me tear this conspiracy apart without showing my cards, it was Bram. My evidence was thin, 3 missing backpats and 1 honest dog. But whoever was behind this had spent serious money and time engineering a surgical replica of my son's face. These weren't amateurs. They had resources, patience, and they believed they'd located my breaking point. I hit call and listened to it ring. Upstairs, water moved through the pipes. The imposter stood in my son's shower using my son's towels, inhabiting my son's stolen existence. But in under a minute, I'd have a former FBI investigator in my corner. And the man upstairs had no idea I was about to turn this mansion into a trap with only one exit through the truth. Bram answered on the 3rd ring. I need you here, I said. Tomorrow morning. Tell no one. I'll be there at 8 o'clock. He said and hung up. No questions asked. That was the foundation of 30 years. I set the phone down just as Rowena's Mercedes turned into the driveway, 2 o'clock exactly. My daughter arrived to embrace the brother she supposedly hadn't laid eyes on in 10 years, and I read her face with the same detached precision I'd used to flag a fraudulent cargo manifest. Through the glass, Rowena stepped out in full CFO armor, a tailored navy suit, hair pulled back without a single concession. My daughter, 42 years old and razor-edged as CFO of Vasey Maritime Holdings, moved with the economy of someone who doesn't waste motion. Behind her, Reed stepped out in his attorney's charcoal suit, briefcase in hand even on a Sunday. Rowena paused at the front door. 1 measured breath, eyes closing for exactly 2 seconds. An actor centering herself before walking on stage. I opened the door before she could knock. Dad. Her voice carried exactly the right tremor. Is it true? Is he really home? Come in, sweetheart, I said. Come see for yourself. Reed Kincaid, 45 and impeccably composed, shook my hand with a practiced grip. 2.3 seconds of contact, corporate protocol down to the millisecond. This must be overwhelming, Clifford, Reed said. A miracle after all these years. Overwhelming doesn't begin to cover it, I told him, holding his gaze. Nothing about this feels real yet. Rowena moved ahead of us into the living room, where Dax stood near the bay windows. She stopped and stared. I watched her face with surgical attention. There it was, 0.3 seconds of absolute stillness before the tears arrived. The precise micro-pause of someone retrieving a rehearsed emotion rather than being seized by a genuine one. I'd clocked that hesitation 1,000 times across negotiating tables, the fraction of a second it takes to locate the expression you've decided to wear. Then the tears came perfectly timed, perfectly weighted. Calder, she breathed, moving toward him. Oh my God, Calder, I thought you were dead. I mourned you. Dax caught her in his arms. I'm so sorry, Ro. I tried to get home. I tried so hard. They held each other. She sobbed against his shoulder, and he moved his hand across her hair with exactly the right measure of tenderness. The performance was flawless. Museum quality. Too flawless. You know what's worse than watching your daughter lie to your face, realizing she learned it by watching you run a corporation for 40 years. I'd taught her to read balance sheets, close contracts, hold composure when everything was on fire. I'd taught her to wall off emotion from strategy, and now she was deploying every lesson to dismantle me with a weapon built from my own son's face. While Rowena held Dax, Reed positioned himself beside me, one hand landing on my shoulder in a gesture of shared disbelief. But his eyes weren't on the reunion. They moved fast and deliberate around the room, security camera angles, desk placement, sight lines, cataloged like an auditor confirming the inventory matched the plan. Not the expression of a rejoicing brother-in-law. The expression of a man verifying a project was on schedule. That the whole family must be reeling, Reed said, still scanning the room. Have you reached out to anyone, police, press? Not yet. I kept my voice even. Wanted to be certain first. Of course. His gaze moved to the bay windows. Better to keep it contained until you know what you have, for the family's sake. That's precisely what I intend to do, Reed. Protect my family. His hand tightened on my shoulder for half a second before letting go. We understood each other completely. We were both lying, we both knew it, and we were both pretending otherwise. They stayed 2 hours. Rowena guided Dax through his missing years with carefully framed questions, feeding him clean openings for rehearsed answers. Reed made coffee, checked his watch 3 times with mounting frequency. When they left, Rowena held me at the door. I'm so happy, Dad, she whispered. Our family is whole again. Yes, I said. Whole again. I watched their Mercedes move down the Oak Line Drive and disappear. Then I went to my study and poured 3 fingers of bourbon I had no intention of drinking. The knock came at 8 o'clock that evening. Odette Drumheller, 60 years old, my personal secretary for 25 years, stood in the doorway with a small cardboard box. Mrs. Vasey left this in my safekeeping 3 years ago, sir. She said, her voice quiet. She told me I would know when the time came. My throat closed. Miriam had left something for me. She made me promise. Odette said, her eyes bright and held carefully in check. I believe this is the time, sir. She set the box on my desk and withdrew, drawing the study door shut with a soft click. Some men fear death. I feared opening that box because Miriam had never once been wrong about our children, and I had never once been right. I lifted the lid. Miriam's leather-bound diary lay inside the edges, worn soft from years of handling. A yellow, sticky note marked the final entry, dated 3 weeks before the cancer took her. Her handwriting remained elegant despite everything. Clifford, she'd written. If you are reading this, I want you to know that Rowena is not evil. She is not broken. She has been starving for your love for 20 years, and you never once looked at her. Not the way you looked at Calder. Not the way you look at cargo manifests and quarterly reports. My hands were unsteady. The bourbon sat forgotten. I fear one day she will do something unforgivable just to make you see her. When that day comes, and I believe it will come, remember that she learned to starve in our house. We fed Calder's dreams, we fed your empire, but we never fed our daughter's heart. The entry ended there. No signature, no farewell, just truth delivered like a knife slid between the ribs. Miriam had known. She'd seen what I had been too blind to see, and I'd slept beside her for 38 years without once understanding that. I closed the diary and left it on my desk, her words pressing into me. She had anticipated that Rowena would do something unforgivable to force my attention, but Miriam couldn't have foreseen the particular form of it, a surgically engineered impostor. A conspiracy requiring years of architecture and a daughter cold enough to be its engineer. The question was no longer whether Rowena was guilty. The question was whether I had built the person who now sat in my house, or simply failed to stop one from becoming her. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my study with Miriam's diary open to her last entry, reading it, until her words stopped being words and became something closer to indictment. By 7 o'clock in the morning, I had arrived at my answer. I hadn't built the monster. I'd simply been too consumed building an empire to notice one taking shape inside my own walls. At 8 o'clock sharp, I walked into Bram Atchley's office on Bay Street and said 6 words that would change everything. The man in my house isn't Calder. Bram's office occupied a converted warehouse in Savannah's historic district. Red brick walls, 15-foot ceilings, harbor charts covering every surface. He looked up from his coffee, read my face in a single glance, and closed his laptop without comment. Bram Atchley, 62, carrying 3 decades of FBI investigative instinct behind steady eyes, had been my friend for 30 years. He'd worked organized crime and Atlanta corruption in Charlotte, and now handled private matters for people who needed help that came without press releases. "You look like you haven't slept in 2 days, Clifford," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down." "I haven't slept properly in 10 years, Bram, but the last 48 hours have been particularly instructive." He poured a second cup and slid it across the desk. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." So I did methodically the way I'd present a corporate briefing. The 4:07 a.m. call from the port. The voice that said father instead of dad. The embrace at the gate that arrived without 3 rhythmic pats on the back, a ritual Calder had performed for 21 years without a single exception. The unlabored breathing without the asthmatic whistle. The missing hot sauce. Compass backing away from the bacon. Then there was Rowena's entrance. That 0.3-second freeze before the tears broke through. The way she handed Dax perfect openings, each one a prompt for a rehearsed answer. And Reed, his gaze cutting around the room like a man verifying a checklist, not a brother-in-law watching a miracle unfold. Bram took all of it in without a word pen moving across a yellow legal pad. 3 decades in federal work had given him a precise sense of when a question helps and when silence pulls more out of a story. "The 3 backpats," I said. "Calder did it every time from age 7 right up until the day he vanished. Not once did he skip it. This man held me like a stranger." Bram wrote, then put a line beneath it. "My dog wouldn't touch bacon, Bram. Compass has turned down bacon exactly 0 times in 11 years. More notes, more lines beneath them. And your daughter was on your doorstep within hours of his showing up," Bram said without lifting his pen. That 0.3-second lag before crying. Correct. He capped the pen and set both palms flat on the desk. I'd seen that gesture enough times to know what it meant. The data had been sorted, and a direction had emerged. "What do you need from me?" No hedging, no gentle inquiry into whether I might be imagining things. Just clarity and forward motion. That told me Bram's instincts had already flagged something before I'd said a single word. "I need to know who he actually is," I said. Who put him in play, and whether Rowena is running this, or whether someone is running her. Bram leaned back, nodding slowly. The degree of physical likeness you're describing doesn't happen by chance. That's surgical work planned over years, funded at a level that rules out opportunists. This isn't a scam. It's an operation. And here's the distinction that matters. Small-time grifters obsess over the visible details, the face, the voice, the wardrobe. Serious operators know the real vulnerability is in the invisible habits, the unconscious behaviors, and they always leave one unguarded. They left the 3 back pats. They left Calder's breathing pattern. They left what a dog's nose knows that no surgeon can replicate. But they nailed everything observable, which tells me whoever assembled this had a long, close look at your family from the inside. So here's our arrangement, Bram said. You go home and keep performing the relieved father. The instant they sense you've seen through it, they either go dark or rush whatever they're building toward. You hold your position. And you? I work the outside. Real identity, money trail, surgical records, anything tethering him to Rowena or Reed. 2 walls around 1 trap. Mine constructed from welcome and apparent belief. Bram's from evidence and the contacts accumulated across 37 years of investigative work. Pressed between those walls, the truth would eventually have no direction left to move. What's your timeline for an ID? I asked. Bram drummed the pencil on the pad's edge. Depends on the paper hygiene. But surgical alteration isn't invisible intake records, pre-op consultations, post-surgical follow-up. They all exist somewhere. Give me 72 hours. What do you need from me? He drew out his encrypted phone and started through his contacts. 22 years in the bureau, 15 more in private practice. The man had a thread into every corridor of the medical legal world. DNA sample, he said. Hair works best. Obtained cleanly, nothing that... There's a fresh comb sitting in the guest bathroom, I said. I put it there yesterday. Chain of custody is intact. Bram looked up from the screen. For the first time all morning, something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, professional respect. You're 3 moves ahead. That's how you built what you built. It's 4 moves, Bram. 3 is where most people stop, and that's why most people lose. He placed a call, kept it under 90 seconds. When he set the phone down, he printed a name on the pad and turned it to face me, Dr. Willa Kestner, Memorial Health Savannah forensic pathologist. She'll handle it quietly, Bram said. Owes me one. Get that comb over today and I'll have something preliminary by Thursday morning. I got to my feet and gripped his hand. It was the first thing resembling hope I'd felt since the phone pulled me out of sleep 2 days earlier. Bram, thank you. Hold that until we know more, he said. When the name behind this surfaces, it may not be one you want to see. I already know Rowena's part of it. Knowing it and being able to act on it are entirely different problems. He walked me to the door and stopped. And Clifford, watch yourself. The people who built this thought ahead. There may be scenarios they've prepared for that we haven't reached yet. I was back on the road, while Bram was already talking to Dr. Kestner, the DNA process, already in motion. 72 hours from now, I'd have a name to put to the face upstairs. But the identity gnawing at me wasn't Dax's. It was the identity of whoever had gone looking for him, rebuilt him piece by piece, and delivered him to birth gate 4 with that kind of precision. Whoever that was had spent real time inside my family's life. They understood what I loved and exactly how to turn it against me. That kind of intimacy doesn't come from research. It comes from proximity. 15 minutes back from Bram's office. I ran the same 2 words around the entire drive inside knowledge. A short list of people had access to that depth. My daughter's name led it. The following morning, I brought my imposter son through the glass entrance of Vasey Maritime Holdings at 9 a.m. sharp. I wanted to watch him work a room full of people who'd known the real Calder since he was 22 years old. 12 floors up, the executive suite spread out behind floor-to-ceiling glass above the Savannah River navigation charts framed on the walls, like paintings, coffee and river air blending through the vents. Odette had quietly passed word to the senior staff before we arrived. Calder Vasey was back from the dead. The boardroom gathered fast. Colleagues I'd worked beside for decades formed a loose line, some of them already crying before Dax had opened his mouth. "I can't believe I'm standing in this room again," Dax said, voice fracturing on cue. I pictured it every day. Every single one. The real Calder had called this building a cage. What he'd wanted was to engineer vessels to work with his hands and his mind together, not sit through quarterly reports managing other people's decisions. He'd given it 3 years before the Atlantic settled the matter. But the people in that boardroom didn't carry those memories. They'd held on to the version of Calder who shook their hands at retirement parties and smiled his way through their stories. "You show me what they put inside you," I thought, watching him move. And he delivered. Dax worked that room the way a practiced campaigner works a crowd, name after name, detail after detail, retrieved without a stumble. He found Audra Tilney from accounting, a woman the real Calder had exchanged perhaps a dozen words with across 3 years under the same roof. "Audra," Dax said, warmth in every syllable. "Nothing's changed. You look exactly the same, still holding this place together." Audra's face opened like a door. "Calder, welcome home, yes, still at it." He pivoted to Bert Dunaway, Senior Operations Manager. "Bert, I heard about the wedding. Congratulations on Sarah's big day. I hated missing it." Bert absorbed this like a man receiving a gift he hadn't expected. "You remembered that. Thank you, that genuinely means everything." Except Calder hadn't known Bert had a daughter. Hadn't known her name, hadn't known there was a wedding. The real Calder barely directed conversation toward operations staff unless the engineering work demanded it. What Dax was pulling from wasn't memory, it was a dossier. A thorough, probably year-long intelligence file on every person in that building, down to the peripheral staff most people never think about. Too flawless. That was the fracture point. Genuine memory has gaps and rough edges. Dax had neither. What he knew, Calder had never known. And here's the thing about corporate environments that most people misread. The most dangerous set of eyes in any organization doesn't belong to senior leadership. It belongs to the independent board members, the ones with no stake in the politics and no incentive to look away. Phineas Corbett crossed from the coffee station toward us. 61 years old, 12 years on the board as an independent member. He'd watched Calder come in as a nervous intern and leave as a capable engineer. He'd sat at Calder's birthday table, heard his jokes, cataloged his habits without trying to. Phineas took Dax's hand with a steady grip. "Calder, good to have you back where you belong. The company's been missing you." "Thank you, Mr. Corbett. This is where I want to be." Phineas tilted his head with the air of a man about to ask something harmless. "One thing I've always been curious about. Do you remember that little path leading to Warehouse 4? Is the old name sign still hanging up?" Half a second. Dax held just long enough for it to register. I believe so," he said. 10 years blurs a lot of the smaller details." Phineas gave an agreeable nod. "Of course it does. A decade rewrites a lot." A brief hand on Dax's shoulder and he moved off, but not before his eyes found mine for the length of a heartbeat. Dax kept circling the room. More embraces, more perfectly calibrated recollections, more tears from people whose hope was doing most of the work. 30 minutes later, after Dax slipped out to the executive washroom, Phineas found my elbow and steered me quietly toward the corridor window that faced the river. When he spoke, his voice had the careful, low register of a man with something real to say. Clifford, there's something I need you to hear." I faced him. "Go ahead, Phineas." He glanced once toward the boardroom, then came back to me. "I don't know who that man is in there, but he is not Calder." Standing beside Phineas, watching the imposter move through a room full of people who should have seen through him, I felt the weight shift slightly. I wasn't the only one who knew. "Tell me what gave it away," I said low and even. "Your son had a name for that path," Phineas said. "He called it Nana's Lane after his grandmother when she set the first cornerstone of that warehouse in 1986. Miriam had told me about it at Calder's 25th birthday celebration. She was so proud he'd honored her mother that way. Calder never called it anything else, not once across 3 years of working here." A breath I hadn't realized I was holding finally left me. "You knew the instant he failed the test," I said. Phineas nodded. The moment he hesitated, Calder would have pushed back immediately. "It's Nana's Lane, Mr. Corbett, probably, with that quiet smile he'd get when someone used the wrong name for something he cared about." I made a decision. Trust. I gave Phineas the full picture. In 90 seconds, the 3 backpats the dog, Rowena's 0.3-second pause. Bram's investigation, the DNA sample already in motion. Phineas absorbed it without flinching, the way a man does when he's spent 40 years as a corporate strategist, and learned that information is never as shocking as people think it should be. When I finished, he asked one thing. "What do you need from me?" "Someone inside this building who's watching," I said. "Rowena has CFO-level access to everything. Reed has attorney privilege. If either of them starts moving pieces, I need to know before I see it on paper." "You believe Rowena built this. I believe whoever put this together had intimate knowledge of this family," I said. "And that narrows the field considerably." Phineas turned to the windows, watching cargo ships thread the channels Calder used to trace from these same panes of glass. "I'll be present at every board meeting, every corporate event. If your daughter or that attorney she married puts a foot wrong, I'll catch it." Dax emerged from the washroom, expression reset, ready for another circuit of the room. "Thank you, Phineas." "Save it," he said, straightening his tie. "When all this breaks open, we're going to have some uncomfortable conversations about succession, because whoever comes out the other side of this, it will not be the man in there pretending to be your son." 2 allies in 36 hours. Bram holding the forensic thread, Phineas holding the corporate high ground. But the clock had been running since the moment Dax stepped out of the dark at Birthgate 4. Whoever funded this operation had sunk years into it. They weren't going to wait long to collect. That evening, I sent Bram a text at 7 p.m., server room 10, come alone. The room housing my most closely guarded technical achievement, the Portwatch tracking system, was about to show me precisely how my daughter had been architecting my destruction. Bram arrived at 10 o'clock, exactly carrying his encrypted laptop and a worn messenger bag. The server room sat in a windowless corner of the 12th floor, sealed behind biometric scan and master key card. Inside, cooling fans filled the air with a low, constant hum. Blue LED light threw long shadows across 20 feet of server racks. The space smelled of ozone and chilled metal. "You told me this system logs everything," Bram said, setting his laptop on the single desk. "How far back am I?" I unlocked the master console. 18 months of unalterable records. Every file opened, every login, every document pulled, time-stamped to the second. And Rowena has no idea you can read her footprints in here. Who knows this room exists? Only me, Odette, and now you. I brought up the authentication screen. Even in her role as CFO, Rowena couldn't step into this space without her credentials being logged. She had signed off on the system herself when we deployed it. Bram's smile had no warmth in it. The irony. That's one word for it. I walked him through the system's origin while my hands moved over the keyboard. It was built in the aftermath of a $2 million embezzlement case in 2021. An accounting manager who'd kept himself invisible for 3 years before I found him. The board approved Portwatch to track cargo movements and close off internal theft. But I had layered in something nobody else knew about complete internal data access logging for every employee, including family. So every file Rowena has touched in the last 18 months. Every single one, I said. The system captures screenshots how long she stayed on each document, even cursor movement if I want it. It was built to stop sophisticated threats from inside. Like your daughter. I never imagined I'd need it for my daughter. I ran the query all executive file access, Rowena Vasey Kincaid category. Estate/inheritance/shareholder. The screen filled. 47 distinct timestamps. There's a particular kind of pain in watching the security architecture you built to protect everything you love become the very instrument that confirms your child betrayed you. Bram moved closer to the screen. First entry, July 18th, 2022. Last entry, October 13th, 2022. 3 months, I said. My voice sounded distant inside the hum of the room. Bram scrolled deliberately, reading each file name as it came up. Estate distribution documents, shareholder registry, Calder's memorial fund, disbursement plans, insurance policy, beneficiary records, trust execution clauses, voting rights, allocation, executive succession protocols. To 47 visits, I said quietly. She was mapping the entire financial architecture, Bram said. Every asset, every clause, every mechanism for succession. This isn't someone browsing Clifford. This is systematic intelligence work. I clicked the first timestamp, July 18th, 2022, 11:43 p.m. The system laid out every action she'd taken during that session. 23 minutes logged in. 14 separate estate documents accessed. Nothing printed, nothing that would trigger a paper trail. But the cursor tracking told the story. Each document centered on the screen, a pause of several seconds, then the next one pulled up. Photographing with her phone. She understood your security protocols, Bram said. I'm the one who taught her those protocols, I said. 40 years of watching me run this company. I scrolled through session after session. Most fell between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. when the building was empty. Session lengths ranged from 20 minutes to 2 hours. She never came on back-to-back nights, varied the gaps by days, sometimes weeks. Operational discipline built to stay below detection thresholds. Those 47 timestamps weren't data points. They were footprints, my daughter walking away from this family one midnight session at a time toward a betrayal 3 months in the making. Stuki Chuksil, look at the session lengths, Bram said, pointing at the screen. The longest ones cluster at the start. July through August, 2 hours, 90 minutes, 2.5 hours. She was still learning, still building her picture. Then it tightens, I said, tracing the pattern. September, 40 minutes, 30. She'd found what she needed. By October, she's down to 20-minute sessions. Pure verification. Bram tapped the edge of the screen. Whoever instilled this kind of operational discipline knew exactly what they were teaching. Nobody taught her, I said. She absorbed it. 40 years of watching me run counter-espionage inside my own company, and she turned every lesson on her father. Bram isolated the final entry, October 13th, 2022, 1:47 a.m. Last session. What did she pull? I clicked through. Emergency contact database. Calder's complete personnel file. Medical history. Dental records, the ones we would have used to identify remains we'd assumed were his. Every document that could help someone rebuild my son's identity from the ground up. She'd spent 17 minutes going through it all one last time. 2 days later, my phone rang at 4:07 a.m. October 13th at 1:47 a.m. Bram said, his voice low. Final verification. And October 15th at 4:07 a.m., the call comes. 48 hours between her last check and the first move. I sat in that blue server light and stared at the screen. My daughter had sat in this building at 2 in the morning, methodically extracting the pieces of my life's work, capturing images of documents that would arm a weapon aimed directly at me. I'd been 20 minutes away in my waterfront house, asleep. "This is admissible," Bram said. Timestamps access records file logs. It establishes premeditation. It proves my daughter spent 3 months building a weapon out of my dead son's face. But Bram, Miriam was right. My voice didn't quite hold. Her diary said Rowena would do something unforgivable just to make me turn and look at her. This isn't about the money. It never was. It's about a daughter who went hungry for 42 years and finally decided to do something I couldn't look away from. Bram closed his laptop without a word. "Tomorrow morning, Dr. Kestner will have the DNA results. We'll have a real name for Dax Marrow." "I already know who he is," I said, still looking at those 47 timestamps glowing on the screen. "He's the ghost my daughter built because the living father wasn't paying attention." I walked out of that server room carrying 3 months of documented betrayal and 47 data points of proof. But Miriam's words kept moving through me. Rowena did this to make me see her. Not for money, for attention. 2 days later, at exactly 2 p.m. on October 19th, Dr. Willa Kestner opened the DNA report and handed me 2 truths that would break and remake everything in the same moment. Her office at Memorial Health Savannah's Forensic Pathology Department carried the familiar smell of antiseptic and paper records. White walls, medical charts, and frames, one window looking out over the parking structure below. Dr. Kestner, 48, chief forensic pathologist, sat behind her desk and reviewed her screen a final time before turning to face Bram and me. We had delivered the hair samples collected from the guest bathroom comb chain of custody intact, legally obtained, documented carefully for the courtroom proceedings that were now inevitable. "The analysis is complete," Dr. Kestner said, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who had spent 20 years delivering devastating news to families who weren't ready to hear it. "My chain of custody is clean. Results are definitive." "Okay, just tell me," I said. "Is the man living in my house actually my son?" She looked briefly toward Bram, then back at me. "I need to take you through both findings. The first one is simple. The second is not." Something in the way she said it made my hands lock around the armrests. Dr. Kestner slid the first report across her desk. I lifted it, took in the genetic marker comparison chart columns of alleles probability calculations. The summary was printed at the bottom in bold. Subject sample shows 0 genetic markers consistent with paternal relation. Probability of biological connection, statistically 0. "Oh, he is not your son," Dr. Kestner said, her voice measured and low. "Not a distant cousin, not a nephew, not any blood relation whatsoever. A complete stranger." Bram leaned forward. Absolute confirmation. No margin of error. "I knew at the moment he didn't tap my back 3 times, I said. My own voice sounded like it was coming from another room. But knowing a thing and proving it are entirely different. "So the evidence is now irrefutable," Dr. Kestner said. "This will hold up in any court." I set the first report down. "You mentioned there were 2 findings." She paused. Her hand moved toward the second printout on her desk, but didn't pick it up yet. Bram asked for a cross-reference against national medical databases, she said. Standard protocol for missing persons cases. I flagged your genetic profile and ran it against the Caribbean Medical Network hospitals in the Bahamas, Jamaica, Cayman Islands, Puerto Rico. My pulse climbed. And I got a hit. She slid the second printout toward me. Hakta DNA profile, registered at Doctors Hospital, Nassau, Bahamas. March of this year. Male, late 30s, trauma admission, head injury, and severe burns. Partial amnesia. Listed occupation as maritime worker. Bram reached across and pulled the report before I could. His eyes moved down the page and stopped. He looked up at me, and his expression carried something I hadn't seen in 30 years of friendship, pure shock. 99.97% paternal match, he read aloud. A father-son relation confirmed. The words, Nassau, Bahamas, March 20th, 2022, and 99.97%, struck me like a hurricane making landfall, 10 years of grief dissolving in a single sentence. Calder. My voice fractured. My son walked into a hospital in Nassau 7 months ago. March 14th, 2022, Dr. Kestner said. Admitted for emergency treatment. Severe burns across the shoulder and forearm. Head trauma consistent with an explosion or significant impact. They held him for 11 days, treated the burns, ran cognitive assessments for the amnesia. Where is he now? I couldn't get enough air. Where did he go after they discharged him? The hospital database doesn't track patients after discharge, she said, but the intake form lists his stated residence as Nassau and his occupation as commercial fishing crew. I sat looking at both reports side by side on her desk. Left page, the man in my home was a complete stranger. Zero relation, deliberate deception confirmed. Right page, my actual son had walked into a Caribbean hospital 7 months ago. Alive, breathing, present 1,400 miles away, while I had been grieving a ghost. March 2022. I said, trying to absorb it. 7 months ago. What had he been doing in Nassau all that time? The registration indicates partial amnesia resulting from head trauma, Dr. Kestner repeated. So it's possible he doesn't fully recall who he is. The burns and the head injury point to a serious traumatic event, possibly the same boat explosion you believed had taken him 10 years ago. Bram was already pulling out his phone. I have contacts in Caribbean maritime networks, hospital administrators, embassy staff. If he's been working fishing vessels out of Nassau, someone will know his face. I had mourned my son for a decade, built a kind of shrine to his memory inside that mansion. Stood at the Savannah River every morning holding on to a miracle I'd long since decided would never come. The whole time he was alive. Walking Caribbean docks under a different name. Possibly with no memory at all of who he was or where he'd come from. Clifford, Bram said, gripping my shoulder. Your son is alive. We can find him. While I was playing chess with an imposter, I said slowly, my real son was out there working, breathing, existing. I'll flag this profile as an active missing person, Dr. Kestner said, fingers moving on her keyboard. If he surfaces anywhere else in the medical network, clinic, hospital, urgent care, you'll be notified immediately. Bram was already on the phone, pacing across Dr. Kestner's office. I need patient records from Rand Memorial Hospital, March 2022. Trauma admission, male, late 30s, possible amnesia case. Yes, this is urgent. Family has been located after 10 years. I sat there holding both printouts. One hand carried proof of conspiracy. The other carried proof of a miracle. The imposter inside my mansion became secondary. Somewhere in the Caribbean, possibly still using medical facilities, possibly working commercial fishing boats, with no memory of Vasey Maritime or Miriam or Rowena or the 28 years of life he'd actually lived, my real son existed. The question had shifted, not who is the imposter anymore. Now it was, where is Calder, and how do we bring him home before whoever set this in motion realizes we know, because the conspiracy had stopped being only about stealing my assets. It was about erasing my son from existence while he was still drawing breath. And whoever built this Rowena Reed, or someone else entirely, they had known Calder was alive and chosen to replace him regardless. That meant they either needed him to stay disappeared, or they were planning something far worse. Knowing Calder was alive rewrote everything. The conspiracy wasn't just theft or fraud. It was erasure. Someone needed my real son forgotten, buried, replaced. And the manufactured duplicate living inside my mansion was the instrument of that erasure. 2 days after Dr. Kestner's revelation, Bram actually slid a manila folder across his desk marked Subject Dax Marrow Complete Identity Reconstruction and said, "You're not going to like what your daughter spent 2 years constructing." I opened the file. Dax Marrow, born Atlanta, 1985, 37 years old. The top page had a driver's license photo from 2019, a lean face with reasonable bone structure similar to Calder, but clearly a different man. Theater credits followed. Minor productions, commercial work, failed auditions. A resume that screams struggling actor drowning in a city full of better talent. Failed actor, Bram said. Mounting debt, eviction notices, bartending shifts to keep the lights on. In August 2020, he was working at a Savannah waterfront bar called the Tidewater. That's where your daughter found him. She found him, I repeated deliberately. She walked in alone on a Tuesday night, Bram said, producing surveillance footage stills. Sat at the bar for 3 hours, talked to him, walked out and left her card. 2 weeks later, she made the first cash payment. I stared at the surveillance image, Rowena in plain clothes leaning across the bar, studying Dax's face, the way you'd examine a piece of unfinished material. What kind of resemblance are we actually talking about? I asked. Bram laid out a comparison analysis. 60% natural baseline, same height, same build, similar bone structure. Close enough to be a starting point. But not close enough, I said. Not close enough, Bram confirmed. He spread surgical photographs across the desk in 2 columns, before and after. The transformation took 18 months and 6 separate procedures across 3 different doctors. Left column, Dax Marrow in 2020, recognizably similar to Calder, but not convincing. The nose was off. Jaw too narrow. The ears shaped differently. Right column, post-surgical photos from 2022, unsettlingly identical. The nose rebuilt to match Calder's exactly. The jaw refined. The chin corrected. Even the ears had been reconstructed. Looking at those before and after photographs was like watching someone forge a Rembrandt. The craftsmanship was undeniable. The violation was absolute. Medical intake forms from 3 different plastic surgeons in Atlanta, Bram said, sliding the stack of paperwork across. All paid in cash through shell accounts. No insurance claims, no documentation, except what he'd unearthed through hospital back channels. She turned a 60% resemblance into this. Professional-grade cosmetic reconstruction. Cost estimate $250,000 minimum. I touched one of the post-surgical photographs. The face looking back could have been pulled from Calder's own album. The precision was surgical in every sense. Walk me through the timeline, I said. Bram laid out a chronology chart. August 2020, Rowena meets Dax at the Tidewater. September 2021, cash payment $50,000 down. October 2021, surgical consultation. Then a cascade: surgeries, recovery, more surgeries, more recovery. The timeline stretched across 24 months, 2 full years of planning, execution, refinement. 2 years, I said quietly. She spent 2 years on this. 2 years of surgical appointments, training regimens, behavioral coaching, Bram said. This wasn't impulse, Clifford. This was architecture. While I sat in board meetings, approved budgets, trusted my daughter, I couldn't finish the sentence. She was building a weapon. Bram finished for me. My daughter had spent 730 days, 730 separate days, sitting across tables from this actor, teaching him to be my son, while I sat alone in my mansion, grieving, never once suspecting the thing I had helped create through decades of emotional absence. There's more, Bram said. He produced another set of documents, withdrawal records from the mansion's private archive. June 2021. Rowena had checked out 3 boxes containing Calder's personal journals, years 2009 through 2014. She never brought them back. My chest tightened. Calder's journals, Dax studied them for months, Bram said, memorizing speech patterns, favorite phrases, family stories, private details. Everything Dax knows about being Calder came from words Calder himself had written down. In Calder's own words, I said. She had fed him my son's thoughts, his memories, his voice. Bram slid across vocal coach records, 6 months of conditioning. Dax learned to speak like Calder, breathe like Calder, carry himself like Calder. The coach's notes described him as exceptionally committed to authentic replication, because he was being paid to pull off the perfect theft of a man's identity. Let me see the full cost breakdown, I said. Bram produced a financial analysis. Surgical procedures, $250,000. Training and coaching, $75,000. Living expenses for Dax throughout the transformation, $30,000. Unknown additional costs covering documents, props, and research materials, conservative estimate $500,000 across 24 months. I sat with those numbers. Rowena had executed this with the same cold efficiency she brought to corporate mergers. Located the target, assessed the opportunity, allocated the resources, managed the schedule, delivered results. She ran this like a corporate acquisition, I said. She learned from the best, Clifford, Bram said quietly, unfortunately. I spread the photographs across his desk. Dax before a struggling actor with passable features. Dax after a surgical replica of my missing son. Between those 2 images stood 24 months of calculated preparation, $500,000 spent, and a daughter who'd inherited every strategic instinct I owned. The cruelest part, I said, isn't the conspiracy itself. It's understanding she learned all of this from me. The patience, the long-range planning, the willingness to spend whatever the objective requires. She's your daughter, Bram said. She built those skills watching you construct an empire, and then she turned those same weapons on me. I gathered the photographs, the timeline, the surgical records. 2 years of evidence. $500,000 poured into fabricating a ghost. And somewhere in the Caribbean, my actual son was alive, possibly hauling nets off a fishing boat, with no recollection of who he was, while this manufactured stand-in lived his stolen life 20 minutes from where I slept each night. But Rowena had made one critical miscalculation. She'd designed Dax Marrow to be a puppet. Trained him, shaped him, held the strings. What she hadn't accounted for was a simple truth. Desperate people handed new identities tend to develop their own survival instincts. And Dax Marrow was about to become far more dangerous to her than he had ever been to me. Rowena had built Dax Marrow to be her instrument. 2 years, $500,000, surgical transformation, behavioral coaching, every variable controlled. But the daughter who absorbed ruthless efficiency from me had left one thing out of her calculations. Desperate people who've been handed new identities develop their own survival strategies. Bram Atchley showed up at my mansion before sunrise with a briefcase packed with counter-surveillance gear, saying we needed to sweep Dax's guest suite before the imposter came back from his run. If he's building insurance, Bram said, arranging his equipment on my kitchen counter, he'd want documentation recordings, evidence he could trade if everything unraveled. Like, you think Rowena is monitoring him? I think she made a substantial investment, Bram said, checking his RF detector. She'd want quality control. Dax had left 20 minutes earlier on his morning run with Compass, a routine he'd locked in over the past week. 3 miles along the waterfront and back by 7:30. That gave us roughly 40 minutes. Bram moved through the guest suite with methodical precision. RF detectors swept electrical outlets, picture frames, smoke detectors. Thermal scanners checked for heat signatures behind the walls. The suite looked immaculate, untouched, ordinary. Bed made to military tightness. Clothes folded neatly in the drawers. Books set on the nightstand. If Rowena planted surveillance, Bram murmured, working his way around the perimeter, she'd want audio at minimum visual if she's being thorough. The RF detector held silent through the closet, the bathroom, the desk area. Nothing. Then it chirped near the nightstand lamp. Bram stopped, adjusted the sensitivity. The chirp steadied into a continuous tone. "I've got something," he said. He pulled on latex gloves and carefully unscrewed the base of the lamp. Wedged against the wiring inside sat a miniature recording device, matte black, professional grade, smaller than a quarter. Bram photographed it where it sat, then extracted it with tweezers and held it under the desk lamp. "Professional grade," he said, turning it over. Voice-activated recording. 60-hour battery life, expandable SD storage. This isn't off-the-shelf consumer hardware. This is surveillance equipment. Rowena wanted proof he was maintaining the performance, I said. That's exactly where I landed, Bram said, until I ran the serial number. He photographed the device's serial code and fed it into his forensic database on an encrypted laptop. The search returned in 30 seconds. What came back made him go completely still. "What?" I asked. "Purchase record. August 2022, Atlanta electronics supplier cash transaction." He turned the laptop screen to face me. "I'm purchased by Dax Marrow." The serial number database returned a name that reframed everything I thought I understood. Dax Marrow, purchaser, August 2022. The puppet had been pulling his own strings from the beginning. "He's recording himself," I said slowly. "Why would the imposter document his own deception?" "Insurance," Bram said. "He knows if this falls apart, Rowena will sacrifice him without hesitation. He's building a lifeboat." Bram started moving through the room differently now, not searching for devices Rowena had planted, but thinking about where Dax would stash backup evidence. He found them in the bottom drawer of the nightstand, 3 SD cards, tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of The Old Man and the Sea. Bram held them up to the light, as if they were cut diamonds. 3 months of recordings, he said. August, September, October. Everything since he moved into this suite. We went back to Bram's office. He loaded the SD cards into his laptop and pulled up audio files sorted by date, hundreds of recordings. He clicked a file from August 23rd. Rowena's voice came through the speakers, crystal clear. Professional audio quality. When you're at the office, don't use the phrase operational efficiency. Calder never talked like that. Say it feels right instead. Dax's voice answering, "It feels right." Got it. And when Dad asks about the boat explosion, pause for exactly 2 seconds before you answer, like you're pulling up a painful memory. Don't overdo it. 2 seconds, pause, then answer. Bram skipped forward. September 15th. Reed's voice entered the conversation. The estate amendment needs his signature by November 1st, Reed said. After that, the distribution triggers automatically. 60% to Calder, that's you, 40% stays with Rowena as co-trustee. Patrick can contest it, but by then the paperwork will already be filed. What if he doesn't believe me? Dax asked. He already believes you, Rowena said. We just need to hold the consistency until November 1st. After that, it doesn't matter. Bram stopped the playback. He recorded everything, every coaching session, every strategy meeting, every incriminating word. Not just audio, Bram said, switching to his financial tracking software. Look at this. Bank records filled the screen. Wells Fargo Market Street branch. Safety deposit box rental agreement. Renter name Dax Marrow. Date opened September 15th, 2022. Access logs showing monthly visits, most recent October 20th. He has a safety deposit box, Bram said. Opened it the same day Reed made that recording about the estate amendment, and he's been going back every month. What's in it? Shaigo and everything he'd need to trade up when the walls start closing, Bram said. Surgical records showing the before and after transformation. Payment receipts from Rowena's shell accounts. The complete audio archive of coaching sessions. A full cooperation package ready to hand over. You know what's more dangerous than a desperate man with nothing to lose. A desperate man who's smart enough to document everything and patient enough to wait for exactly the right moment to use it. He's been playing survival chess from the first day, I said. While Rowena believed she controlled him, he was quietly building his exit. A professional actor learns the role, Bram said, but a smart survivor makes sure he has leverage before the curtain drops. Dax knows precisely what he is, a disposable asset. So he did what any intelligent operator would do. He documented the conspiracy, positioned himself as the most valuable cooperating witness federal prosecutors could ask for, and sat on it. I studied Bram's screen, months of access logs to that safety deposit box. What happens when he decides to deploy the insurance? It comes down to who reaches him first, Bram said. Us, Rowena, or the FBI? The man sleeping in my guest suite wasn't a pawn. He was a third player at the table running his own game, and his next move was coming. Dax's safety deposit box confirmed he was playing for survival, accumulating leverage for when everything collapsed. But that move would have to wait, because 2 days after Bram found those recordings, Rowena and Reed arrived at my study at precisely 2 p.m., carrying a leather portfolio marked Estate Amendment Proposal, and I knew the endgame had formally opened. Rowena walked in full CFO mode, tailored charcoal suit, hair drawn back. Presentation materials arranged with the same precision she brought to quarterly earnings reports. Reed followed with the portfolio, his attorney composure immaculate. They moved through my study the way executives move through a merger pitch. Dad, Rowena said, setting her tablet on my desk. Now that Calder is back, we need to update the estate documents and the shareholder provisions. It's only right. The legal framework needs to formally reinstate his standing. Reed opened the portfolio. Standard succession planning. We've put together comprehensive amendments. I waved toward the chairs across from my desk. Of course. Let me see what you've prepared. Reed spread documents across my desk with the practiced fluency of a Manhattan corporate attorney. What I'm about to uncover changes the weight of everything that came before it. And it raises a question I've been sitting with ever since. If you discovered that someone close to you had been quietly working against you, would you confront them the moment you knew, or would you wait and gather every piece of proof first? 42 pages. I counted as Reed spread them across my desk. Every paragraph crisp and formatted, every clause tied back to another by cross-reference. A complete structural overhaul, Reed said, tracing the opening summary. 7 covers the voting share restoration. 12 updates the trust distribution triggers. 19 handles tax strategy. I pulled page 7 toward me. Dense legal prose describing how Calder Vasey's voting rights would snap back into place upon signature. 28% of company voting authority returning to his name. Page 12 laid out the distribution mechanics, automatic keyed to execution date. Beneficiary designations refreshed. Rowena named as secondary fiduciary under co-trustee provisions. Page 19 was a tax surgeon's blueprint: gift exposure, minimized estate disbursement, optimized IRS challenges, anticipated and deflected. Nothing was left to chance, Dad. Rowena said, her gaze fixed on me. So Calder deserves to have everything restored. I slowed at that. Let the clause language roll past my eyes. Exceptional craftsmanship, Reed. Here is the line between attorneys who are good and attorneys who are great. The good ones guard against visible risk. The great ones guard against risks you haven't imagined yet. Reed Kincaid was operating in that second category precision that would command respect at the most elite firms on the Eastern Seaboard. Not a gap left open, not a challenge left without a preemptive answer. Had I walked in without knowing what I knew, this would have read as a daughter doing right by her brother. Reasonable, thoughtful, unimpeachable, but I did know. Which made these 42 pages not estate planning. A masterpiece of legal theft. Page 28 matters most, Reed said, navigating to a tabbed section. Distribution timeline. Execution triggers immediate effect on all provisions. Voting share transfers complete automatically within 90 days. 90 days, I said. Standard processing window, Reed said evenly. SEC requirements, shareholder notifications fully compliant. Rowena leaned in. We want this done properly, Dad. Family taking care of family the right way. Reed reached into his briefcase and produced a fountain pen. Cross Townsend gunmetal, the kind of object that announces you've already won. He set it beside 3 signature pages pulled from the back of the stack. We could execute today if you're ready. Mobile notarization this afternoon here within 2 hours. 42 pages reduced to 3 places to sign. Clean, final, irreversible. Rowena hadn't shifted her eyes from my face, watching for any crack of doubt or suspicion. I set the documents down and met her gaze. 40 years went into what's described here. 40 years building Vasey Maritime. I owe it a personal review of every clause, my own counsel beside me. Of course, Dad, Rowena said immediately. No friction, no visible impatience. Take whatever time you need. We want Calder's reinstatement handled correctly. A week, I said. I'll go through it line by line, sit with my attorney, understand every implication. Absolutely, Reed said, gathering the documents back into the portfolio with practiced efficiency. Nothing here should feel rushed. We'll be in touch early next week. They rose together, firm handshakes, warm, calibrated smiles. Rowena pressed her cheek to mine on the way out, first time in months. I walked them to the door, watched their Mercedes trace the oak-lined drive until the taillights curved out of sight. Back in my study, I stood at the window for 5 full minutes without moving. Watching that car vanish, I felt something absent from 40 years of corporate warfare. Not relief, not anger. A quiet, absolute certainty, the stillness of a man who doesn't need to react to what just happened, because he predicted it 2 months ago and already laid the answer in place. 42 pages. Reed had poured months into that document. Every line aimed at the same transfer of control triggered by my signature. Without what I knew, it would have landed perfectly. But I'd been carrying that knowledge for 3 weeks Rowena knew nothing about. I took my encrypted phone and dialed Phineas Corbett's direct line. First ring, Phineas. I said the amendment just arrived right on schedule, 40-some pages of legal work. Grim satisfaction in his voice. Reed's specialty. 42 pages, I confirmed. Masterful construction. Had I signed it, control shifts to their column inside 90 days. How long before they push for the signature? Days, maybe a week. But I have everything arranged. December 15th, I need you in that boardroom. Full board annual shareholders meeting. The irrevocable trust, Phineas said. Executed October 1st. Correct, I said. 14 days before Dax ever appeared. Sole trustee, 51% controlling interest sealed against family interference. And December 15th is when we reveal it. DNA evidence Dax's recorded sessions, Bram's full forensic package, and one element Rowena has no knowledge of. Which is my actual son walking through the boardroom doors while her imposter sits at her side. 3 seconds of silence. You found Calder. Bram traced him to Nassau. We're bringing him home. He arrives December 14th. My God, Clifford. December 15th isn't just the annual meeting, Phineas. It's the day everything collapses. The trap I built 2 months ago finally springs. I hung up and looked at Reed's 42 pages lying across my desk. The instrument they'd forged to dismantle me would become Exhibit A in their prosecution. Rowena and Reed believed they were closing on the finish line. They had no idea I'd moved it 3 months ago. December 15th was locked. The trap was set. Phineas would surface the trust. DNA results would unmask Dax. Bram's recordings would document the conspiracy. And Calder would walk into that boardroom while the man impersonating him sat beside my daughter. But first I needed to look at the foundation one more time. October 27th. I drove to Atlanta alone to sit across from the document I'd executed on October 1st, 2 weeks before everything changed. Proof that I'd been watching long before my daughter realized it. Off every calendar. No mention to Rowena. Consultation fee paid in cash. The 60-mile drive from Savannah into downtown Atlanta gave me room to think about how single details accumulate into patterns, about how Odette had mentioned in late September that Rowena was pulling estate balance sheets at 11 p.m. behind a locked door. One deviation. That was all it had taken to make me move. Alderton and Associates held the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Atlanta's financial corridor. Elite estate planning, the kind of firm that manages billion-dollar trusts and doesn't advertise because clients arrive through referrals exchanged in rooms like the Savannah Golf Club dining room. The receptionist recognized me before I spoke. Mr. Vasey. She said, Mr. Tulliver is ready for you. Conference room 3. Hadwick Tulliver, senior partner and Atlanta's most discreet estate architect, was on his feet when I entered. 61 years old, silver-haired, a suit, cut from cloth that doesn't come off any rack. He had drafted the irrevocable trust that would neutralize my daughter's conspiracy before she had a chance to trigger it. Mr. Vasey, he said, gripping my hand. Good to see you again. The trust documents are laid out and ready. I settled across from him. I need every clause reviewed, Hadwick. Rowena just put her own amendment proposal in front of me. His eyebrows shifted slightly. Couldn't be better timing. He spread the documents across the polished table. 73 pages, far more substantial than Reed's 42-page filing. Walk through the structure with me, Tulliver said, tracing the summary. 51% of Savannah Maritime Holdings voting shares placed inside an irrevocable trust. Phineas Corbett named sole independent trustee with absolute discretionary authority. I turned to page 12, the trustee provisions. Phineas held full command, cast votes, sanction corporate actions, execute agreements. No family member could reach those levers. Take me back through the access restrictions, I said. Tulliver opened to Section 4. Total lockout sustained until every corporate dispute, inheritance challenge, and legal action reaches resolution. A vault door. Your children cannot vote. These shares, transfer them, encumber them, or contest the trust's existence, while corporate litigation is active or reasonably anticipated. Reasonably anticipated, that's the key language. Correct. A sworn affidavit from you stating litigation is foreseeable under current circumstances, holds the trust sealed. Phineas retains sole control. October 1st. Tulliver read it aloud, and the room shifted. I watched the recognition cross his face, the understanding of what that date actually signified. I hadn't scrambled to respond once Rowena made her move. I had mapped her trajectory and built the counter trap before she launched. Read the execution date into the record, I said. Tulliver drew the signature page forward. Execution date October 1st, 2022. Notarized by Sarah Mitchell, witnessed by Thomas Bradford and Jennifer Holmes, filed with the Chatham County Clerk's Office October 2nd. October 1st, I said again. 15 days before the phone call that supposedly brought my son home, Tulliver set the document down. You read the play before it was made. The trust was active from the moment the imposter walked in. I recognized the pattern, I said. Rowena pulling files after hours. Reed steering dinner conversation toward estate structure. That exchange of glances between them when I floated the idea of revising my will. Subtle, but I caught it. Before I get to the date Tulliver read aloud, the one that rewrote the entire outcome in a single breath. Drop an A in the comments if you believe I'd planned this all along, or a B if you think circumstance saved me. 5 to 10 words, your reasoning. Fair warning, portions of what follows have been reconstructed to serve the narrative, but the strategic truth underneath it is real. Take me through the mechanics, I said. If someone moves to alter the estate, what happens? Tulliver opened to Section 7. Any effort to restructure distributions, revise shareholder agreements, or interfere with corporate governance while the trust is operating kicks the dispute resolution clause into motion automatically. The agreement is explicit. Estate instruments filed after the trust took effect are null if they collide with trustee authority, which means Reed's amendment, even if you'd put your signature on it, would have been worthless the second it hit the filing desk. Tulliver laid it out plainly. The trust sits above everything that comes after it. 100 amendments, 1,000. Not one carries any legal force against a controlling trust interest. Hearing Tulliver lay that out with such flat certainty, it felt the way I imagine a ship's captain feels when the hurricane finally arrives and the vessel doesn't shudder. You built it for exactly this. You saw the storm gathering long before anyone else could smell the rain. Reed poured months into that proposal, I said. 42 pages of legal architecture, every bit of it worthless. From the moment those shares went into the trust on October 1st, Tulliver said, any attempt to modify the estate through a subsequent instrument became a legal nullity. I settled back. Last question. Can it be fought? Challenged, contested, dismantled, not a flicker of hesitation. Irrevocable is not a suggestion, Mr. Vasey. This structure was vetted by 3 separate independent attorneys. State trust law wraps properly executed irrevocable trusts in what amounts to an impenetrable shell. Every estate lawyer in Atlanta could take a look, and not one of them would give your daughter a different answer. There is no pathway to break it, alter it, or find a way around it. So my daughter had been sprinting toward a finish line that had been erased months before she ever laced up her shoes. Since October 1st, Tulliver confirmed. Correct. I picked up all 73 pages and held them. The weight of certainty. Documentation that on October 1st I had quietly moved the entire prize out of Rowena's reach before she ever aimed Dax at my gate. She had burned 2 years on this. She had spent real money and recruited a desperate man to claim something that had been legally beyond her grasp for 14 days before he ever arrived. She believed she was pulling off something flawless. She was performing for a theater of one, and I had already written the final scene, December 15th. I said, pushing back from the desk. That's our moment. The shareholders' meeting, Tulliver said. I'll see that certified copies go to every board member. We shook hands, and I walked out of that Atlanta office with 73 pages that would collapse Rowena's entire scheme. A single filing made 26 days before she assumed the clock had started. The drive back that afternoon, I sat with those pages on the seat beside me. Rowena had staged her production, not knowing the audience already held the last act. The legal structure was solid. Her conspiracy had nowhere left to go. Everything now was simply waiting for the curtain call. Then, at 11:17 p.m. on October 29th, 3 deliberate knocks came at my study door. Measured, spaced. The rhythm of a man who'd made his choice and wasn't flinching from it. I was sitting with Reed's estate documents across my desk when I heard them. Before I moved, I already knew the face I'd find on the other side. Dax Marrow filled the doorway in the same clothes from dinner khakis, a button-down. But the composure was gone. The fabric wrinkled, something hollowed out behind his eyes. He looked like a man whose internal accounting had finally come up short after weeks of running the numbers every possible direction. Can we talk? He said. The 2 of us. Nobody else. I waved him in. Close the door behind you. He entered and pressed it shut, barely a sound. Then he stood there, weight distributed, evenly, hands loose at his sides. Calder's rehearsed bearing had left him. This was just a man. I'm not your son. You already know that. He said it without theater, without build-up. We've both understood the situation for 2 weeks. We've each been running our side of it. I held his gaze. Sit down. I'd rather not. Sit down, I said again, harder. We handle this the way grown men handle things across a desk face to face. He settled into the leather chair. The same one Rowena had occupied 3 days prior when she laid her estate amendment in front of me. When did you figure it out? About 5 seconds after you embraced me at Birthgate 4. You left out 3 backpats. Calder did them without thinking every single time, going back to when he was 7 years old. You went completely still. Dax absorbed that slowly. Nothing in the coaching covered it. Of course not. It was a habit Rowena never witnessed closely enough to document. He dipped into his jacket, produced a USB drive not much larger than a stick of gum, and pushed it across the mahogany toward me. It scraped quietly over the surface. Everything's on there, he said. 3 months of audio. Rowena and Reed's surgical consultations, payment records, training sessions. The full picture. I turned the drive over in my fingers, smaller than my thumb, heavy, in a way that had nothing to do with its weight. It held the case that could put my daughter in federal prison. So why hand it to me? Because walking away isn't something they'll permit. Not while I'm breathing. I need someone with the resources to keep me alive. And you need what I'm carrying. His eyes didn't drop. Full cooperation. Testimony in federal court, anything that's required. I want a cooperation agreement, whatever your lawyers can structure reduced exposure immunity, if it's possible, some form of safety. Here's the thing. Nobody tells you about sitting across from a con man who's just come clean. There's a moment where he becomes the most straightforward person you've dealt with in weeks. I got up, crossed to the bar cart, and poured 2 measures of whiskey. Blanton's single barrel. I set one in front of Dax, a quiet signal that whatever came next was outside the normal ledger. From the start, I said. Leave nothing out. He lifted the glass, took a measured sip, and returned it to the desk with care. August 2020. I was behind the bar at the Tidewater. Career going nowhere, debt stacking up, 3 months past due on rent. She came in by herself sometime around 9, ordered bourbon. Then she sat there and watched me for 20 straight minutes. Watched. Like I was something she recognized from a photograph she'd been carrying for years. Eventually, she asked whether I'd ever had work done, cosmetic work. My first instinct was that it was a strange kind of proposition. Instead, she placed 2 images in front of me, a photo of his son and a surgical diagram. I took a pull of my whiskey and let the heat settle in my chest. She told me my face was worth $500,000, Dax said. My first reaction was that she needed help of a different kind, but then she walked him through everything, the procedures, the compensation structure, the timeline. 2 years of physical and behavioral transformation in exchange for the kind of money that doesn't arrive twice in a failing actor's life. And you agreed. I was 3 weeks from the landlord, changing my locks, eating whatever I could afford, collecting rejection notices. She was holding out more than I'd bank in a decade, pouring drinks. He stared at his own hands as if they belonged to someone he barely recognized anymore. I agreed, before I'd really thought through what agreeing meant. 6 surgeries, I said. 6, he confirmed. Nose, jaw, ears, chin. Recovery after each one, weeks of swelling pain, then starting over. After that, voice work, movement coaching, whole months spent absorbing your son's journals. 3 boxes worth. His phrases, the way he'd build a sentence, the stories he carried from his childhood. You learned him so well you stopped knowing yourself. Dax gave a slow nod. When the last surgery finished healing, I looked in the mirror, and the man looking back wasn't anyone I'd ever met. Sitting there watching him, a man who had surgically and methodically become my son, I found myself finally hearing what Miriam had been saying to me across years. I had refused to listen. 38 years as a brilliant architect of business. 38 years as a disaster of a father. There's one piece I never could make sense of, Dax said. Something she never addressed in all that preparation, all those sessions. Tell me. Why? Just why? He leaned across the desk. She's your daughter. She holds the CFO title. She has money, standing a seat at the table. What makes a person throw all of that away? 2 years, $500,000, the risk of federal prosecution. For what? I didn't answer right away. His question settled into the room and stayed there. I thought about Miriam's diary, that last entry, the one that named Rowena's hunger for acknowledgement as the thing to watch for. I thought about the 4 decades I'd spent constructing something vast and significant, while my daughter stood at the edge of it, sharp as anyone in that building and entirely unseen. The answer wasn't buried. It was right on the surface. It wasn't about money, Dax. I kept my voice low. She did all of it because she wanted me to see her. Just that. He couldn't quite believe it. That's all this was. No, I said, and I held his gaze. The full answer is that I spent decades teaching her to be precise and ruthless, to build strategies with real teeth, to always be thinking ahead, and I never once sat across from her and said I was proud of what she'd become. He held very still. Everything, the surgeries, the impersonation, years of preparation just to get your attention. I couldn't find a response. Because what I was actually sitting with was worse than any of that. Rowena hadn't simply constructed a scheme. She had built a mirror and angled it directly at me. And what it reflected was a man who could dissect a balance sheet down to the decimal, but had been completely blind to his own daughter, standing 20 feet away, hollowed out from waiting to be seen. Dax said quietly. Yeah, I said. We sat in silence. Two men on opposing sides of a conspiracy, brought together by the shared realization that the same blind spot had claimed us both. Then, on November 1st, Bram Atchley rang me at 7 in the morning and delivered 6 words that upended everything I thought I understood about who was really tearing my family apart. Reed's been stealing for 14 months. I was standing at the kitchen counter with my coffee halfway to my mouth when those words landed like a fist. Say that again. Your son-in-law had been draining Vasey Maritime Holdings since September 2021. Bram said, his voice clipped with barely contained anger. 18 wire transfers. Total $18.3 million. Every single one sized to fall beneath the federal reporting floor. $900,000 here, $1.1 million there. He'd been routing it all through a shell company called Tidal Basin Advisory LLC, registered in the Cayman Islands. I put the mug down before I lost my grip on it. How did this stay hidden? Because Reed controlled the accounting systems, Bram told me. He buried the transfers inside legitimate operating costs, port fees, equipment leases, insurance premiums. Every line item looked routine. It took 3 weeks of forensic digging just to trace the thread. I pulled out a chair and sat down hard. $18.3 million, I said. 14 months. September 2021 through October 2022. Bram confirmed. That's 5 months before Rowena tracked down Dax in that Columbia shelter. Reed began stealing half a year before his wife set the imposter scheme in motion. The weight of that settled over me in layers. They weren't coordinating, I said, working through it out loud. Reed had his own exit plan running. That's how Bram read it too. Rowena was executing a long play. Replace your dead son, seize the trust, absorb the company. Reed was doing something completely different, liquidating. He was moving $18.3 million offshore while his wife built a fraud that depended on Dax maintaining his cover for years, maybe decades. 2 entirely opposite endgames operating under the same roof. I pressed both palms flat on the table. When did they get married? Yucatan, June 2018, Bram said. 4 years back. I ran the arithmetic. Calder's letter, the one posted from that fishing vessel in 2017, the one that never found me, had been intercepted in August 2017. Reed married Rowena 10 months after that. He'd grabbed Calder's letter in 2017, married into the family in 2018, and opened the spigot on the embezzlement in 2021. 7 years of positioning. And now he was cashing out. The last transfer had gone through on October 27th, $1.03 million, 4 days before Bram caught the pattern. Something cold and precise settled in my chest. This wasn't passion or desperation. This was Reed Kincaid, methodical patient, inserting himself into my family 1 year at a time, accepting the title and the access that came with it, and then systematically peeling away what he could carry. How do you even begin to calculate the damage done by someone you brought in specifically to protect your finances? Does Rowena know? I asked. Bram didn't think so. If she'd been aware Reed was running his own theft operation, she would have shut it down, his embezzlement, put everything she'd built at risk. A bankrupt company was worthless to her. She needed Vasey Maritime standing when December 15th arrived. But Reed doesn't need the company, I said. He just needs his $18.3 million and a boarding pass somewhere with no extradition agreement. Exactly, Bram said. He'd already pulled Reed's travel records. 4 trips to Grand Cayman in the last 14 months, each logged as a banking conference. Every one of them fell within 48 hours of a major wire transfer. I stood and moved to the window. Outside, Atlanta was coming awake, traffic stacking on the arterial's office towers, lighting up floor by floor, people settling into the ordinary machinery of their day. And I was standing here absorbing the fact that my daughter's husband had pocketed $18.3 million while her own scheme to replace my dead son unfolded in the same household. 2 betrayals running in parallel pointed at the same target. Where do we go from here? I've already reached out to the FBI, Bram said. Agent Naomi Burrell is opening a federal investigation, wire fraud and money laundering. With what I've put together, they can freeze Reed's offshore accounts and have a warrant ready within 72 hours. I turned from the window. Hold off. Don't move on him yet. Bram said nothing for a moment. Why wait? Because the moment we arrest Reed, Rowena understands we've been watching the whole operation. She vanishes. Dax vanishes. We lose December 15th entirely. So Reed walks free for another 6 weeks, Bram asked, choosing his words carefully. We let the FBI finish building a case that holds, I said. We document every thread. And on December 15th, when Rowena settles into that boardroom expecting to execute the trust and take what she believes is hers, we lay it all out at once. The imposter, the fraud, the full conspiracy. And then, while she's still absorbing that the Bureau walks through the door and takes her husband away for stealing $18.3 million from this company. My maximum impact, Bram said quietly. Maximum justice, I told him. We spent another 20 minutes coordinating evidence protocols, FBI timelines, asset freeze procedures. When I finally put the phone down, my coffee had gone cold, and my hands weren't entirely steady. Reed Kincaid had married Rowena in 2018, 1 year after he'd intercepted the letter that might have brought my real son back to me. He'd spent 7 years embedding himself in my company, my household, my confidence. And then, in September 2021, while his wife was assembling the most audacious fraud I'd ever encountered, he'd quietly begun extracting pieces of what I'd built, hiding them offshore, constructing his own way out. 2 conspiracies, 2 betrayals, 1 family. And in 2 weeks, on December 15th, Rowena would walk into that boardroom, believing her husband stood at her side, with no idea the FBI had already assembled a federal case that would put him away for 20 years. Captain Okafor's call arrived at 7:43 on a Friday morning, 48 hours after the Bureau had opened its investigation into my son-in-law. I was in Bram's office going through wire transfer documentation when his computer signaled an incoming video call from a Barbados area code. That's him, Bram said, clicking to accept. The screen opened on a man in his mid-50s face, seasoned by decades of Caribbean weather, standing on a working dock with stacked containers rising behind him. Mr. Vasey, he said, his voice carrying the easy cadence of island English. I'm Captain Terence Okafor. I run freight between Nassau and Savannah, 43 years in Caribbean shipping. Your attorney asked me to keep watch for a man named Calder Vasey working the maritime routes. My throat closed. You found him 3 days ago in Nassau, Captain Okafor said. Working deck crew on the MV Osprey Sound under the name Nate Elwood. Been aboard that vessel 18 months. I showed the first mate your son's photograph. He's older now, carries less weight scar on his left hand from a winch accident, but it's him, Mr. Vasey. It's your son. I grabbed the edge of Bram's desk. "Where is he now?" Bram asked. "The Osprey Sound is underway towards Savannah," Captain Okafor said. "Departed Nassau yesterday with a container load. 7-day crossing should make port November 18th, perhaps the 20th if weather pushes them." I radioed the captain, let him know there's a man in Georgia looking for Nate Elwood family business. He's agreed to keep Nate aboard until you can get to the dock. Was he all right? My voice broke on the question. Captain Okafor's expression shifted, something gentler moving through it. He looked like a man who's been carrying something heavy for a long time, Mr. Vasey. Thin, quiet, keeps apart from the crew, but he's healthy. He's alive. And in 2 weeks he'll be standing on a Savannah dock waiting for you. The call ended with Bram handling payment arrangements and logistics. I sat afterward with the blank screen in front of me, trying to hold what I'd just been told, that my son, the one I had long since accepted as gone, was alive, working under a borrowed name, and would be home inside a fortnight. That afternoon, alone in my office at Vasey Maritime Holdings, I opened the desk drawer and took out the photograph I kept there. Calder at 20, standing on the dock at our marina, one hand easy on a halyard, entirely in his element. Captain Okafor had described the way Nate Elwood worked cargo lines in Nassau, the same unhurried competence my son had built as a teenager on these same docks. I sat with that photograph and felt something that wasn't quite relief, because grief that's had 18 months to settle doesn't simply lift. It collides. Somewhere out on the Atlantic, Calder was working his way towards Savannah, and somewhere in this city, Rowena was refining her December 15th plan, still certain her brother was gone from this world forever. How was I going to tell her Calder was alive without making her understand that Dax had known it all along? 2 days. On that Sunday, November 5th, I had lunch with Senator Randolph Peel at the Savannah Golf Club. Peel was 63, a 3-term independent out of Louisiana, who'd spent 3 decades threading his way through Charlotte politics with the patience of someone who always thought further ahead than the person across from him. He'd reached out Friday afternoon, said there were legislative developments touching Vasey Maritime that couldn't wait. We were seated overlooking the course. Before I'd even ordered, Peel pushed a manila folder across the table. Clause 47B, he said. Amendment to a Maritime Commerce Bill introduced 3 weeks prior. Creates a regulatory loophole that would slash the value of AI-driven maritime patents by 60 to 70%. I opened the folder. Pages of highlighted legislative language, dense technical text about patent classifications. I don't understand, I said. Why would your son-in-law lobbied 3 Commerce Committee members to back it? Senator Peel cut in quietly. Used the Vasey name, presented himself as speaking on behalf of your company. Told them you believed AI maritime patents were overvalued and the market needed correcting. The grilled redfish the waiter had set down went cold and untouched. Reed did this, Peel confirmed. Amendment scheduled for a floor vote November 29th. If it passes, your Portwatch patent loses $47 million in valuation overnight. Worth maybe $15 million at best. I set my fork down, understanding arriving with cold, crystalline precision. He's not just embezzling, I said. He's gutting the company's value before he disappears. That's exactly what it looks like, Peel said. Drain the cash through theft, crater the patent value through legislation, leave Vasey Maritime as an empty shell. My guess is he plans to vanish before anyone figures out what he's done. Can you block the amendment? I'm already building opposition, Peel said. But I need you to testify publicly. The committee has to hear it from you directly that Reed was acting without any authorization from you. Your testimony kills the amendment, Clifford. You're the victim in this, not the villain. I sat in my car in the Savannah Golf Club parking lot afterward, hands resting on the wheel, watching Senator Peel's black Cadillac ease out of sight. 3 deadlines converging November 18th to 20th when Calder would arrive. November 29th when Clause 47B would come to a vote. December 15th when the trust executed, and Rowena believed she'd locked down control of everything. 34 years ago, I taught 8-year-old Rowena to read shipping manifests in this same parking lot, walking her through the maritime business that would one day be part of her inheritance. Now her husband was methodically dismantling that inheritance, while her co-conspirator positioned himself to steal it outright. Bram was waiting in my office when I got back at 4 p.m. "I found something," he said, sliding a document across my desk. "Reed's marriage license application from 2015. I looked at the form. Standard Georgia marriage license. Reed's information filled in with careful handwriting. But there was a notation in the margin name change documentation, Carson to Kincaid, filed Chatham County, June 2015. "Carson," I said. "I ran the name," Bram said quietly. Harlan Croft owned Croft Maritime Services, an Atlanta shipping firm, competed directly with Vasey Maritime for Gulf Coast contracts through the 2000s. In 2008, you acquired their primary client base. Croft Maritime went bankrupt 6 months later. Harlan Croft lost everything: his business, his house, his retirement. He died in 2018. I stared at the marriage license, understanding shifting beneath me like tectonic plates. "Reed is Harlan Croft's son," I said. Bram nodded. "He changed his surname 6 months before he met Rowena 7 years ago. Everything since then, the courtship, the marriage, the CFO position, the embezzlement, the legislative sabotage. It wasn't opportunistic theft, Clifford. It was a revenge plot his father had designed before he died. My son-in-law wasn't an ambitious man who'd taken advantage of a vulnerable family. He was Harlan Croft's son, and he'd spent 7 years executing vengeance for a father who'd lost everything to Vasey Maritime's business practices. And I had no way of knowing whether Rowena had been deliberately targeted or simply a convenient opening for a man whose entire purpose was my destruction. The silhouette stepping off Captain Okafor's vessel at 5:45 that November morning carried my son's shoulders, but 10 years had carved a stranger's posture into that frame. I stood on the private pier south of Savannah. Bram beside me, watching Calder Vasey, 38 years old, weathered by a decade of Caribbean freight routes, come down the gangway with the careful movements of a man who'd stopped trusting solid ground. He wore a faded work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and even from 20 feet away, I could make out the massive burn scar running from his left shoulder to his forearm, jagged purple-pink tissue that caught the early light like a topographical map of survival. Captain Okafor followed him down, carrying a single duffel bag. "He worked my cruise for 8 months before I knew who he was," Captain Okafor said quietly to Bram, handing over the bag. "Solid sailor. Whatever he went through made him careful." Calder stopped 3 feet from me. No embrace. A nod. "Dad," he said. His voice was rougher than I remembered, worn down by salt air and years of silence. "Calder," I managed. We stood there in the pre-dawn gray, 2 men bound by blood and divided by 10 years of manufactured grief, neither of us knowing how to close that distance. "I can't go to the house," Calder said at last. "Not yet." Bram said, "Someone's living my life." "Yes," I said. "My garage has a side entrance," Bram said. "No one will see you." Calder nodded again, shoulders tight, and turned toward Bram's car. Captain Okafor shook my hand before he left. "He's been through something terrible, Mr. Vasey. Whatever you're planning to do with the people who tried to replace him, make it count." Bram drove us through empty Savannah streets as dawn came up over the water. I sat in the back seat next to my son, close enough to reach out, but paralyzed by the sheer weight of everything I had to tell him. The imposter conspiracy. Rowena's marriage to Harlan Croft's son. The embezzlement. The legislative sabotage. The December 15th deadline. My hands trembled against my knees. Somewhere in Atlanta, Dax was probably waking up in the guest house, preparing for another day of pretending to be the man sitting beside me. And I was going to have to tell Calder that Dax existed, that a surgically altered stranger was wearing his face, living in his childhood home, accepted by his own sister as family. How do you explain to a man that the grandson who carries his genes calls someone else dad? Bram's garage was a converted warehouse near the port, secure and out of the way. He pulled inside, locked the bay door, and brought us to a back office, a couch, a desk, fluorescent lights humming in the quiet. Calder sat on the couch. I took Bram's desk chair across from him. Bram stood by the door, a witness to a reunion 10 years in arrears. "Show me," I said quietly. Calder understood. He rolled back his left sleeve, slowly revealing the full scar. It began at his shoulder, jagged and deep, running down his bicep and forearm in rolling waves of healed tissue that looked like wax melted and frozen mid-flow. The kind of wound that should not have left a survivor. I reached out and touched it with my fingertips. Words failed entirely. "The explosion took everything." Calder said, his voice flat with the exhaustion of carrying this alone for 10 years. I woke up in a Nassau clinic 3 weeks later with a name I didn't recognize, and burns they said should have killed me. No memory, no identification, no way to prove who I was. The clinic staff had called him Nate Elwood because that was the name on the work shirt he was wearing when fishermen pulled him from the water. 3 weeks, I whispered. 3 weeks unconscious. Calder confirmed. When I finally came around, I knew I was somebody. I just had no idea who. Fragments surfaced slowly over the years. Images of boats, faces without names, a house near the water. Nothing solid enough to find the way home. "And what finally brought it back?" Bram asked. 6 months ago, I was offloading cargo in Port-au-Prince, Calder said. A shipping manifest came through for Vasey Maritime. The name hit me like a physical blow. I knew that name meant something. I started asking questions, pulling records, piecing the fragments together. Found old news articles about an Atlanta maritime family. Found photographs that matched the faces I'd been seeing in my memory. And I knew. He looked directly at me for the first time since stepping off Captain Okafor's vessel. "I tried to find my way back, Dad. I'm sorry it took this long." I shook my head, throat too tight to form words. This wasn't his fault. None of this was his fault. "I'm sorry," I said at last. "Everything that's happening now, the imposter, your sister's marriage, the company, it happened because I failed both of you." "Tell me about the imposter," Calder said. So I did. The October 15th phone call from Rowena saying she'd found him in a Columbia halfway house. The immediate feeling that something was wrong. Bram's investigation. The surgical records. Dr. Edmund Reyes and the $500,000 transformation. Dax's real identity. The trust execution deadline. Rowena's complicity. Reed's embezzlement and his Croft family revenge conspiracy. The Clause 47B legislative sabotage. 2 hours of information compressed into brutal factual sentences. Calder sat motionless through all of it, absorbing a decade of family betrayal in a single morning. When I finished, silence settled into Bram's garage like water filling a sealed compartment. Then Calder asked the question that cracked everything open. Does Rowena know? His voice was steady, controlled. Does my sister know I'm alive? I could have lied. Could have shielded him from this last betrayal for a few more hours. But he deserved the truth. She found out October 15th, I said quietly. Bram told her the same day we confirmed Dax was an imposter. She knows you're alive. She knows exactly where you've been. And she decided to cover for Dax regardless. The color left Calder's face entirely. A full month, she knew. His voice broke on it. She knew I was out there, and she picked him anyway. Under the fluorescent hum, the burn scars seemed almost to throb. 10 years of damage his sister had weighed against protecting a thief, and the thief had won. Yeah. That's it, I said. Calder shoved up from the couch, moved to the far corner of the garage, and put his forehead against the concrete wall. His shoulders convulsed once, twice, then locked down hard. Right then, I understood something I'd been avoiding. The blast a decade ago hadn't only erased my son's past. It had handed my daughter a reason to bury him and never look back. Calder spent the 26 days from November 18th through December 14th inside Bram's garage, working through 10 years of a stolen life, while we assembled the evidence that would bring down everyone who'd engineered his erasure. Now at 11:38, Bram's hand on my shoulder was the only thing keeping me in my chair in the terminal alcove 30 yards from gate D12, where my son-in-law was due to appear in 9 minutes with $2 million in a briefcase and a Canadian passport naming him Daniel Reeve. Varnell and Swick are behind the jetway service door, Bram murmured. False bottom in the briefcase, $2 million in hundreds. Daniel Reeve's passport flagged customs clearance an hour ago. He's locked in. Through the alcove's tinted partition, I kept my eyes on the gate area. Emirates Flight 204 to Dubai was wheels up at 11:55. Out of Dubai, a man named Daniel Reeve could melt into any of a dozen countries that don't honor extradition requests. Reed had been laying this groundwork for years, the offshore accounts, the shell entities, the borrowed name. The only thing left was walking down the jetway. There, Bram said under his breath. Reed Kincaid materialized at the far end of Terminal D at 11:43, unhurried, deliberate, the body language of a man running a script he'd already rehearsed 100 times. Charcoal suit, leather briefcase in his right hand. He glided through the thin, late-night foot traffic, the way any road-worn executive might catching a red-eye abroad. No tells. No scanning the room. Pure, predatory calm, wearing the costume of a business traveler. He reached gate D12, stepped to the counter. From 30 yards, I couldn't catch a word, but I watched him lay the Canadian passport on the counter with the unhurried ease of someone who'd never once doubted this moment. The agent ran it, looked at her screen, and brightened. "Mr. Reeve, you're in boarding group 2. She said, her voice clear in the near-empty terminal. "We'll have you on your way shortly." Reed pocketed the passport and settled into a seat near the boarding queue. 7 years at my dinner table, holding my grandson beside my daughter at every family occasion. 7 years threading this exit into the background while playing the devoted husband. I watched his hands. They didn't shake. They didn't fidget. Just the still, patient grip of a man who'd embedded himself inside my company, taken my daughter as a wife, and siphoned $18.3 million to avenge a father my business had ground into nothing. And I couldn't dismiss the recognition 40 years ago I'd operated with that same pitiless focus when I absorbed Harlan Croft's client base, hollowed out his firm, and left the man with no path forward. Predation wasn't foreign to me. The distinction was that my version had been fought in daylight inside the law. Reed's version was built on fraud, 7 years of deception, and stolen money. At 11:46, the gate agent opened boarding for Group 1. Reed rose and straightened his jacket, ready to step into the line. Agent Doyle Varnell came first through the jetway service door, 43 years old, 20 years, hunting white-collar fugitives moving through the terminal with the kind of unremarkable presence that lets you cross a room before anyone registers you've moved. Agent Petra Swick was right behind him. 36 financial crimes specialists, the arrest warrant, and evidence manifest in her left hand. 15 feet between them and Reed Kincaid. 6 seconds. Reed Kincaid, Varnell said, flat and procedural. FBI, turn and face the wall. You're being arrested. Wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. Reed went still. The briefcase dropped from his fingers and cracked against the terminal floor, the sound bouncing off every surface in gate D12. 8 minutes. That's how close the cabin doors were to ceiling. 8 minutes from gone. Swick cuffed him while Varnell lifted the briefcase onto the gate counter. The agent, who'd wished Reed a pleasant flight barely a minute before, pressed herself against the wall, staring. I want my attorney. 4 words. That was all Reed offered. Varnell read him his rights. Swick worked her phone, photographing the briefcase as seized evidence. The few passengers in the boarding queue held their ground and watched federal agents process the scene with the brisk economy of people who've done this many times. By 11:51, Reed was in cuffs. The briefcase was in evidence, and Swick was walking him out through the terminal while Varnell handled airport security. Bram got to his feet. That's it. Swick is messaging Rowena's attorney right now. 30 minutes, and she'll have the news. We went out through the terminal without a word, past checkpoints, past darkened shops, into the cold December air. The parking structure sat mostly empty. Bram's car was on level 3, and we held our silence all the way to the highway southbound toward Savannah. She'll call, I said once the city was behind us. She'll call, and I won't have a single thing to say that doesn't break something worse in her. She made every one of those choices herself, Clifford, Bram said, voice low. Every day from October through November, she got up and chose that imposter over Calder, over you, over the company. Now she carries that. I kept my eyes on Atlanta's distant lights bleeding into the dark, thinking about Rowena reading a text from her lawyer at 12:15 a.m. Husband arrested, federal charges, $2 million seized. And in a matter of hours today, since the clock had already tipped into December 15th, she'd be walking into the Vasey Maritime boardroom for the shareholders' meeting and coming face to face with her actual brother for the first time in 10 years. How do you absorb all of that? Husband in custody, son exposed as a fraud, real brother resurrected, and still stand upright in front of a boardroom in 9 hours? You don't. You let her crack open tonight and find out what's left by morning. Bram's dash clock showed 12:28 a.m. when the phone buzzed against my ribs. I took it out. Rowena's name on the screen, reaching out from whatever wreckage she'd landed in 13 minutes after her attorney's message hit. My thumb sat over the green button. Bram caught my eye in the rearview mirror, steady waiting. I thought about Calder, 26 days on a garage couch, sitting with the knowledge that his sister had learned he was breathing and still kept the lie going. I thought about the boardroom in 8.5 hours, every consequence of every decision Rowena had made since October 15th, arriving at once. And I understood that picking up now would only soften a blow she needed to feel in full. I held the phone and let it ring out. The vibration stopped. Road stretched ahead, dark and straight. Somewhere back in Atlanta, my daughter was sitting alone inside the choices she'd made, with 9 hours left before every fabrication collapsed, and she'd have to stand across from her real brother and tell him why she'd decided a stranger mattered more. I pulled into Vasey Maritime headquarters at 7 a.m., 3 hours ahead of the meeting that would settle everything. Rowena came through the door at 8:57 with Dax a half step off her left shoulder. She'd made the calculation go down with the imposter, rather than walk into this room without cover. The sleeplessness was written on her shadows under her eyes, suit not quite pressed hair, done without its usual care. The night had been the arrest. The morning was the defense. Dax stood at her side, 37 years old, every feature engineered to specification. A face built to order. The one flaw, the missing burn scar, was the detail no one had thought to fake. Phineas Corbett called the session to order at 9 a.m. exactly. 12 board members around the mahogany table. Senator Peel in the observer's chair. Bram to my left, with 3 evidence folders. We're convened on an emergency basis to address identity verification ahead of trust execution, Phineas said. Dr. Kestner, the floor is yours. Dr. Willa Kestner walked the board through the DNA findings with a detachment that reduced genetic impossibility to arithmetic. The probability of any biological relation between the man seated next to Mrs. Kincaid and the Vasey family line is 0, she said, distributing the packets around the table. Not a single marker matches across the full panel. Rowena's jaw tightened. She said nothing. Bram presented the signature work, next 12-point deviation, across pressure patterns, loop structure, and terminal stroke formation. Expert determination, deliberate forgery. Dax didn't move, held the expression of a man enduring a false accusation, right through to the end. Mrs. Kincaid, you may respond, Phineas said. She came to her feet slowly, both hands on the table. My son has been Calder Vasey for 7 years. Whatever case you think you've built. The boardroom doors swung open. Calder walked in, Captain Okafor 1 step to his right. My son came through the door in a dark blue button-down left sleeve already rolled to the elbow, the massive burn scar laid bare shoulder to forearm, jagged purple-pink ridges running in waves, a map of a decade of survival pressed into flesh. He walked to the center of the room and halted 10 feet from where Rowena stood, motionless. My name is Calder Vasey, he said quietly. I survived an explosion 10 years ago that left this scar and took my memory. I'm home now. The water bottle in Dax's hand slipped loose. It struck the table with a hollow knock. No, Dax whispered. You died. The boat? I didn't die, Calder said, turning to face him. I came around in a Nassau clinic 3 weeks after the blast. It took 10 years to piece together who I was and find the way back, but here I am. And you've had your feet under my life long enough. Silence owned the room. Calder. Rowena's voice came out barely above a breath. Hey, Ro. Soft. It's really me. 1 tear traced down her cheek, then another. Her mouth opened and found nothing. She'd spent months defending a stranger, chosen the imposter over her own flesh and blood, and now stood watching him, breathe scarred, alive, present, while the entire structure she'd built on deception fell to pieces around her. Dax reached toward her shoulder, and she pulled back as if his hand were a lit match. Don't, she whispered. Don't come near me. Her knees went. She caught the table edge just in time. All color had abandoned her face. Her eyes were fixed on the scar evidence she couldn't contest, couldn't reframe, couldn't survive. And I watched my daughter come apart in slow motion, her real brother bearing witness, as she absorbed the full cost of having chosen a stranger wearing his face. Rowena stayed on her feet, spine rigid, refusing to meet my eyes or Calder's. Agent Varnell came through the door at 9:16, Miranda card in hand. She raised her palm before he got a word out. That won't be necessary, Agent, she said, voice composed, despite the fracture I'd just watched move through her. I'll stipulate to the record. Not because I have no choice, but because I'm done carrying it. Varnell stopped. Mrs. Kincaid, you have the right to... I tracked Dax Marrow for 18 months. Rowena cut in, addressing the full board. Located him at a Savannah waterfront bar in August 2020. 6 months of observation, his mannerisms, his speech, his physical proportions. In August 2021, I made him an offer. $50,000 for preliminary facial reconstruction. $200,000 on successful family integration. $250,000 final payment when the trust executed. Phineas leaned forward. Rowena, I strongly advise. I coordinated 3 surgical procedures. She kept going, each word measured. 14 months of work, bone structure, scar tissue removal, eye color. Total expenditure, $487,000. Drawn from an inheritance account my mother left that my father never knew about. She turned to face me directly. 6 weeks of psychological conditioning. I taught Dax how to handle a Halyard-Reed shipping manifests speak in Calder's cadence. Photographs, voice recordings, family histories drilled until he could deliver them cold. I went after the estate methodically. Knew the trust triggered when Calder turned 38. Knew presenting him after a decade's absence would activate paternal guilt. I accounted for every variable but one, which one Varnell asked. The real Calder walking back in. She glanced briefly at her brother. I believed the explosion had killed him. I was filling an absence with someone who could carry the name. I was wrong. She turned back to face me. In her expression, I found something I hadn't seen since she was 8 years old, a raw, desperate need to be recognized. I didn't do this for money, she said quietly. The trust was leverage, not the goal. I did this so he would finally look at me. Just once. See me as something beyond the adequate daughter who filed paperwork while he built a company alongside his real child. She extended her wrist toward Varnell. I'm ready. They walked her out at 9:37 a.m. 6 hours later, I was standing at the end of a secure holding corridor, while Calder sat across from Rowena through security glass, 38 years old, and scarred, facing his sister at 42 in handcuffs. You wired money to keep me in the Caribbean, Calder said. Monthly payments to Captain Okafor and 3 other operators. You weren't just hiding Dax. You were making sure I couldn't come home. Yes, Rowena said. Why? Because if you surfaced before December 15th, the whole thing unraveled. Her voice cracked. I needed Dad to need me for something, anything, even if that thing was a crime. I didn't stay away because of your payments, Calder said. I stayed because I wasn't ready to face what home meant. The explosion stripped everything, my identity, my confidence, any sense of where I belonged. But when I found myself again, I came back. He leaned forward. Oh, I'm still your brother. Tears moved down her face. You were always the better one, she whispered. No, Calder said. I was just the luckier one. I got the explosion that took my memory. You got the father who looked through you like you weren't there. Neither of us deserved what we got. Calder stood, set a hand briefly on her shoulder, and moved toward the door. His eyes found mine down the corridor. No accusation in them. Only a question I had no answer for. What had I done or left undone that made my daughter conclude that committing a crime was the only way to make me see her? My daughter passed me in federal custody and didn't look up as they led her by. I spent 3 days after Rowena's transport sitting with Calder's unspoken question about where I'd fallen short as a father. The answer was taking shape in an Atlanta law office where trust documents translated neglect into numbers and handed me one last chance to put family before empire. Lawrence Fenimore, 59 years old, 3 decades administering Atlanta's largest estate trusts, read the distribution terms with measured neutrality on December 18th at 10 a.m. We sat in his downtown conference room, the 4 of us, myself, Calder, Bram, and Phineas, while Fenimore formalized what I'd restructured in the 72 hours since Rowena's confession. 40% voting equity and operational control to Calder Vasey, Fenimore read. 40% to the Miriam Vasey Foundation for Maritime Family Services, established December 16th, with a charter mission to locate missing maritime workers, support disappearance investigations, and fund advanced burn treatment research. Calder's head came up sharply. You're naming it after Mom. She used to say money is just paper unless it brings people home, I said quietly. Took me 10 years to understand what she meant. 20% voting equity to the Rowena Vasey Education Trust. Fenimore went on, held under independent trustee control for the duration of her federal sentence and for 5 consecutive years post-release with 0 recidivism, at which point full distribution rights transfer to her. Phineas leaned in. You're giving her 20% after everything she put this company through. I'm giving my daughter a reason to come home once she's served her time, I said. There's a distinction worth making. That's $80 million, Phineas said. Gone after engineering the largest maritime fraud in Georgia history. Yes, I said. Bram watched me with the look of a man who'd devoted 3 months to building a prosecution and was now watching its architect choose something other than victory. He didn't push back. He'd been in that holding corridor. He'd seen Calder rest a hand on his sister's shoulder while she sat in cuffs. Rowena may not liquidate, transfer, or leverage the equity, Fenimore continued. She may vote on governance matters and collect annual dividends. The principal is protected in perpetuity. So she can't sell it, Calder said. She can only be family. That's right, I said. 40% bearing Miriam's name felt like honoring a promise 8 years overdue but still worth honoring. In her final months before cancer took her in 2015, she'd made me swear I wouldn't stop looking for Calder. I'd broken that promise for a decade. The foundation wouldn't give her back, but it might return other missing sailors to families who still had time left. $4 million annually. Fenimore confirmed. Tracking services for 200 active cases per year, family support for 300 additional research funding for 12 major grants. Calder looked across the table at me, the burn scar showing on his left arm. This is because of what happened to me. This is because of what happened to us, I said. You vanished. Your mother died asking me to keep searching. And when you finally walked back in, you carried scars that should have killed you and a sister who'd been paying people to hold you at a distance. If this foundation spares one family from living through any piece of that, it's worth every dollar. After Bram and Phineas left Calder, and I sat alone with the trust papers on the table between us. Are you sure about this? He asked. $80 million after everything she put together. I slid the final clause document across to him. Read the last line, Calder read aloud. Your brother forgave you in a corridor. I'm forgiving you in a trust. Now forgive yourself and come home. He set it down slowly, then pushed it back across to me unsigned. Before this goes to her cell, he said quietly, add one line. Tell her I'll be waiting when she gets out. My pen found the addendum space. My son had just offered grace where he had every right to withhold it. He'd spent 38 years learning to extend grace. I was only beginning to grasp it myself. I added Calder's line to the trust document that night, your brother will be waiting when you get out, and passed it to Bram to deliver to Rowena's intake cell. 2 days on, Bram called at 8:30 on the morning of Reed's arraignment. Changed your mind about being there? No, I said. I was in my Savannah study with Calder across the desk going over shipping manifests for the Caribbean routes he'd be taking over in January. Tell the prosecutors justice doesn't need a witness from me to function. 7 counts, Bram said. Conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, obstruction, identity fraud, conspiracy, and 3 counts fraudulent disclosures. 18 to 22 years federal. His attorneys pushing for a plea, but Reed's insisting on trial. I watched Calder mark up a notation about Caribbean freight logistics. The same corridors he'd worked for 8 months under the name Nate Elwood. Reed's courtroom performance was somebody else's chapter now. Bram rang back at 11:15. He turned down the plea. Trial begins in March. The evidence is Iron Bank records, Dax's audio recordings, Portwatch server access logs. He's facing the full 22. And Dax cut a deal yesterday. 5 years conspiracy and identity fraud. Full cooperation against Reed in exchange for the reduction. He said yes. Sitting in my study while Bram walked me through a courtroom I had no intention of entering, felt like reading weather forecasts from a storm that had already blown through. The damage was tallied. The reconstruction had begun. What mattered was the man across the desk, learning the business his mother had spent her dying breath asking me to teach him. "Dad," Calder said, glancing up from the manifest. "Still with me?" "I'm here," I said. "Where were we?" "Nassau Customs protocols," he said. So I walked him through them. 2 days later, I attended Rowena's sentencing at Chatham County Courthouse. She came in wearing County Orange, her attorney beside her, as the judge read out the terms. 7 years custody, 4 years minimum, before any consideration of halfway housing, plus $2 million in civil restitution. Her cooperation on co-conspirator asset recovery, noted as a mitigating factor. Remanded immediately. Rowena gave a single nod, didn't find my face in the gallery. Afterward, Bram caught up with me in the corridor. She asked if you came. I told her you were just outside. She nodded and went with the bailiff. I handed him the sealed envelope, 42 pages of trust documents giving my daughter 20% of an empire, and one sentence telling her she was still family. "She needs to read this tonight," I said. "The first night is the worst. I want her to know she isn't alone." Bram dropped the documents at 8 p.m. Rowena had them by 8:45. The following morning, he appeared at my door carrying a single folded piece of county jail stationery. "She sat with the trust documents for 2 hours," he said, "and then she wrote this." I opened the page. 3 words in Rowena's careful handwriting. That was all. 3 words receiving 42 pages of mercy, $80 million in protected trust, and 2 sentences telling her she was forgiven and that her brother would be waiting. "What do I tell her?" Bram asked. "Tell her I got it," I said. 3 words back, I got it. I set the page on my bedroom shelf beside Miriam's diary. The room didn't sit as hollow as it had. The shelf that used to hold only memory now carried the first fragile thread of something that might become repair. "It's a start, Miriam," I said quietly to no one. That night, Calder found me reading Rowena's 3 words for the 10th time. "What does it say?" he asked. I passed him the page. He read it without speaking for 10 seconds, then looked at me with something I couldn't fully read. "Should I write to her?" he asked quietly, the question I'd been circling since Bram brought the letter. Could my son write to the sister who'd bankrolled keeping him gone, who'd installed a stranger in his place, that stranger now serving 5 years without choosing sides in a family that had barely started to mend? Or did choosing not to write amount to choosing sides anyway? I told Calder to write to his sister, if that was what he needed to do. That reaching toward reconciliation wasn't the same as endorsing what she'd done. He nodded and withdrew to his office for 2 hours. When he came back out, he handed me a sealed envelope addressed to Rowena and said he'd put down what needed saying. I didn't ask what that was. The Miriam Vasey Foundation paperwork arrived December 29th, with Calder's signature as executive director already dry on the incorporation page, and I understood my son had spent the week laying his mother's legacy into place while I'd been paralyzed, wondering how to answer my daughter's three-word letter. The Foundation Charter set out its operating mission: maritime disaster survivor support, missing mariner tracking networks, family liaison services during disappearance investigations, DNA, matching coordination with Caribbean port authorities, and advanced burn treatment research funding. Calder had transferred the entire Portwatch patent, $47 million in updated valuation, as the founding endowment. I found him in the Vasey Maritime Conference Room, working through Foundation operating budgets. "You donated the patent," I said. "The patent is worth more as Mom's Foundation endowment than it ever will be as my inheritance," Calder said, not looking up from the spreadsheet. 47 million can find a lot of missing sailors. Maybe keep other families from losing a decade the way we did. I sat across from him and saw Miriam in the set of his jaw, the deliberate way he organized numbers into purpose. "Your mother would have built this foundation 20 years ago if I'd listened to her," I said. "You're already smarter than I was. I just had a better example of what it costs when you don't," Calder said quietly. Senator Peel called that afternoon with word that Clause 47B had been struck from Georgia maritime commerce legislation by a 9-1 Commerce Committee vote. "Your testimony finished it," Clifford O'Pruntarlith. Peel said, "but your son's foundation made them ashamed they'd entertained it at all. Hard to justify devaluing maritime patents when a Vasey just put $47 million toward helping the industry." Legacy reshaped from tragedy. My son converting a lost decade into institutional help for families I'd never meet. Miriam would have been proud. Rowena's letter had mentioned 47 unanswered calls before she stopped trying to reach the truth. The same number as the millions Calder had just donated to find missing sailors. I wondered whether forgiveness means learning to notice the numbers that follow us, or learning to finally stop counting. The second letter from Rowena landed December 30th, pages long rather than 3 words. I read it in my study while the afternoon light came in sideways through the windows. She laid out the full journey: the October night she found the imposter on the kitchen floor, the 47 calls to my voicemail before Dax's call at 4:07 a.m. On October 15th made silence feel like the only option. The choice to stay quiet because my voicemail had felt safer than my judgment. She described watching Calder come through the boardroom doors, seeing the brother she'd buried standing in front of her, alive, scarred, undeniable. I understood then that I'd spent 7 years protecting a ghost, while the real person waited somewhere in the Caribbean, she wrote. I chose wrong. I chose fear over truth, comfort over courage, the imposter over my own brother. I'll use these 7 years working out why I go to pieces when it counts most. When I walk out, if you're still willing to look, I'll be here. I read the letter 3 times before laying it beside her first 3-word note on my desk. If you're still willing to look. She'd spent 42 years believing the answer was no. December 31st. At midnight, Calder and I sat on the veranda above the Savannah River, the same place I'd spent 10 years alone watching the water and waiting for a son who'd been alive the whole time. Fireworks opened over the harbor, reds and golds catching in the dark river below. The sound rolled across the water like distant thunder. Compass, the old retriever who'd kept watch on this veranda through all the missing years, finally had both Vaseys home to rest between. He lay with his gray muzzle across Calder's knee-tail, moving exactly 3 times against the wooden deck, the same quiet rhythm of the year I'd rebuilt. One for the son who came home, one for the daughter who might, one for learning the distance between raising an empire and raising a family. Are you all right, Dad? Calder asked, watching me watch the fireworks. I held the question honestly for a moment before answering. She not sure all right fits the ledger, son, I said. Lost a decade, nearly lost a daughter, built an empire, and forgot to build a family. Your mother died asking me to keep searching, and I failed that promise for years. Another firework broke open gold, dissolving into silver. But I think I'm finally learning how to live instead of just enduring it. And you're here. That counts for something. Calder reached over, gripped my shoulder once, and let go. We sat in the quiet, watching the harbor come alive with light, while Compass's tail beat 3 more slow times against the deck. After midnight, I went to my study and took out Vasey maritime letterhead, set down a single line, in the careful hand Miriam had always said. Made my writing look like it belonged on a shipping contract, sealed it in an envelope addressed to Rowena at the correctional facility. Odette Drumheller, 54, and managing Vasey household correspondence for 15 years, understood which letters needed expediting and which needed handling quietly. This one called for both. I found her in the kitchen, putting together the New Year's breakfast. This needs to reach the correctional facility by January 2nd, I said, holding out the envelope. Can you make sure it moves first? I'll take it there myself, Mr. Vasey. Odette said, accepting it with the deliberate care of someone who recognized when an envelope carried more than paper. She'll have it by Wednesday morning. I watched Odette go, turning over the circular shape of everything in my mind. This story had opened with the wrong son calling me father at 4:07 a.m. On October 15th, his voice riding a phone line thick with deception. It was closing with the right daughter reading 4 words I'd put down in ink on December 31st. Father will be here. Voice to paper, false son to true daughter. Both messages opening with the same word aimed at the same man who'd spent 42 years assembling wealth and neglecting family. 7 years from now, Rowena would walk out of custody and find her father 68, now 75. Her brother 38, now 45. And a foundation carrying her mother's name that had turned loss into something useful for maritime families who still had time to bring someone home. The question wasn't whether I'd be standing there. It was whether she'd forgive me for needing 42 years to learn how to be a father rather than simply an empire. But I'd be waiting to find out. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. Truly. This story took everything out of me to carry, and I hope it gave you something worth holding on to. Looking back, the cost of those years is hard to name in any single word. A decade of mourning, a son who was alive. A daughter I failed so completely she felt a crime was the only way to reach me. An empire built on contracts and cargo while the people who mattered most drifted quietly out of reach. I believe God doesn't waste that kind of pain, but He does expect us to learn from it. The reckoning came slow, and it came hard, and by the time I understood what I'd lost, some of it could only be repaired, not recovered. Here is what this story taught me, and what I'd pass on to anyone willing to hear it. Don't wait for a crisis to look at the people standing beside you. See them now. If someone in your family is acting out of pain, the answer is rarely punishment, it's presence. A name on a building means nothing if the people who carry your name feel invisible to you. And this no amount of wealth protects a family that hasn't been tended to like one. This is the kind of family revenge story that doesn't leave you quickly, because underneath the betrayal and the legal maneuvering and the boardroom confrontations, it's really just grandpa stories. The ones about what we pass down without meaning to. The wounds, the silences, the second chances we almost didn't take. If this story moved, you share it with someone who might need it today. And if you haven't yet subscribed, there are more stories here worth your time. Leave me a comment telling me what hit you hardest. I read them. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.